This is a compilation of over 3 hours of Resident Evil's most disturbing lore explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with Resident Evil's most disturbing enemy lore explained. Resident Evil has been hiding some of gaming's most disturbing tragedies in plain sight for nearly 3 decades. Every mutated monster, every experimental subject, every bioweapon failure tells a story that's far worse than the visual horror suggests. That's why today, I'm breaking down the 8 most disturbing enemies in Resident Evil lore and the documented cruelty that created them, starting with the girl who survived 31 years of torture searching for her dead mother, Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor isn't just Umbrella's longest surviving test subject, and after decades of documented files across multiple games, nobody can explain how she survived experiments that killed literally everyone else in under a week. Umbrella kidnapped 14-year-old Lisa and her mother Jessica on November 10, 1967. They needed subjects for progenitor virus testing at the Spencer Mansion facility. Most subjects died within 72 hours. The successful ones became mindless bioweapons with zero cognitive function. Lisa received progenitor Type B, then Type A, then Ebola, then multiple T-virus variants, and finally the NE alpha parasite. Every single virus strain had a 100% fatality rate when used alone. She survived all of them simultaneously. But then the research notes reveal something impossible. Lisa didn't just survive the viruses, she integrated them. Her body didn't fight the infections. It absorbed them and used their genetic material to enhance itself. By 1988, 21 years after her first injection, Umbrella researchers documented that she had developed complete immunity to every strain they created. Here's where the files get disturbing. Jessica died within days of infection. Lisa's cognitive function deteriorated so severely, she couldn't recognize that her mother was dead. When female researchers passed through the lab, Lisa attacked them and tore their faces off, believing one of them was her mother. Her diary from November 1967 states she found mom, but she was fake. Not her real mom. Same face, but different inside. She spent 3 decades collecting faces and wearing them, desperately searching for a woman buried in a tomb directly beneath her cell. The July 1988 research file from William Birkin describes her as biologically impossible. Okay, fine. But impossible doesn't explain the actual data. The Type A virus killed 47 subjects in 3 days. Lisa integrated it in 6 hours. The NE alpha parasite drove every other host violently insane within 5 minutes. Lisa absorbed the parasite completely. It vanished into her bloodstream. That absorption led Birkin to discover the G virus inside her body. Dr. Birkin's notes from 1988 state Lisa represents an evolutionary dead end that somehow became viable. His later observations mention mechanisms beyond our understanding, but he never explains what those mechanisms are. How did incompatible virus strains merge inside one person? Why did she retain enough consciousness to remember her mother's scent 30 years later? How did she survive in the abandoned laboratory basement for a decade without food or water? Players who examined the original game files discovered something Capcom removed. Lisa was supposed to speak. Full voice lines were recorded. An actress performed dialogue, showing Lisa had coherent thoughts and could form sentences. Then Capcom deleted every trace of it from the final game and turned her into a shambling monster who only says one word in 1998 when she finally finds her mother's skeleton. Mother. But if surviving every virus Umbrella created seems horrifying, wait until you learn about the bioweapon that's literally made from stitched together corpses with parasites fighting for control. Regeneradors. Regeneradors are the only enemy in Resident Evil created by implanting multiple parasites into human corpses, and after reading the development files from Los Iluminados' island laboratory, the creation process is somehow worse than watching them regenerate in the actual game. The process requires at least 3 Las Plagas parasites transplanted into a single body. Sounds simple enough. Living hosts receive a single parasite that takes over motor functions, while the person remains technically alive. Regeneradors work completely differently. According to the Biohazard Kaitai Shinsho guidebook, when parasites are transplanted into living humans, body temperature rises abnormally and the host dies while feeling great pain. So researchers had to use corpses instead. They implanted multiple plagas into dead bodies, then froze them to prevent decomposition. But then the documented lab reports reveal what happens inside the body. The parasites don't cooperate, they fight each other to occupy the consciousness. Multiple organisms battling for control of the same nervous system while taking over the role of organs. The corpses corpse has no immune response, so the parasites successfully colonize every system. The original person is gone. What remains is several parasites struggling for dominance inside reanimated flesh. The Island Facilities Case 2002F file documents an escape incident. One Regenerador broke containment and rampaged through the laboratory for 20 hours straight. 20 hours! It killed 7 researchers and injured 19 people before teams could subdue it. The incident report notes that intelligence loss combined with advanced regeneration proved to be a horrific combination. The creature felt no pain, understood no commands, and regenerated from every wound in seconds. Here's the biological impossibility. The parasites function as the heart, plural. Multiple organisms pumping blood through a dead body. Shooting them does nothing because the flesh instantly repairs itself. The only way to kill them requires destroying the parasites hidden inside the chest cavity. But you can't see them without thermal imaging equipment. You're shooting blindly into a corpse that's been dead for months, hoping to hit organisms the size of leeches buried in rotting tissue. And that's just the standard Regenerador. Some of them transform when killed. They explode, regenerate in an instant, and reappear covered in retractable spikes, the Iron Maiden variant, named after the medieval torture device because it draws victims close, then impales them on protruding needles from every angle. The Los Illuminados researchers documented that victims were likely local villagers, people who lived in the area before infection. Their corpses were stolen, frozen, implanted with parasites, and reanimated without consent or awareness. The only mercy is that no human thinking capacity remains. But if fighting parasites for consciousness inside a corpse sounds disturbing, wait until you learn about the hallucination, specifically designed to weaponize your guilt about your own child, the baby. The baby is the only enemy in Resident Evil history that isn't biologically real, and that somehow makes it worse, because Donna Beneviento created a hallucination, specifically targeting Ethan Winters' deepest fear about his own daughter. The mechanism works through mold-infected flowers growing around House Beneviento. Donna possessed a Cadu parasite, allowing her to secrete a signal-producing substance which controls plants infected by the mutamycete. When Ethan inhaled the pollen, his brain became vulnerable to manipulation. The baby manifested from his subconscious. It represents his terror that Rose might not grow up as a normal human because of her connection to the mold. The creature has a grotesquely oversized fetal appearance and calls out Daddy while pursuing him through the basement. It's psychological warfare disguised as survival horror. But then you learn about Donna's backstory and realize she's weaponizing her own trauma. Donna suffered severe childhood isolation because of a facial scar. Her father created the doll Angie as her only companion. Then both parents committed suicide after her Aunt Bernadette died in Miranda's Cadu experiments. Mother Miranda's assessment file explicitly labels Donna as mentally underdeveloped and declares her a failure as a vessel for Ava's resurrection. The baby attacks something no other Resident Evil enemy targets: your emotions. Not your health bar, your actual psychological state as a parent. Director Morimasa Sato confirmed this section was inspired by Silent Hill's approach to horror, a deliberate departure from Resident Evil's science-based monsters. Development notes describe the design as Eraserhead-esque. American colleagues working on the game considered Donna the scariest of the four lords, despite her minimal screen time and subtle presence. Here's what makes it genuinely disturbing. The hallucination pulls from Ethan's subconscious fears he cannot consciously acknowledge or verbalize. The creature knows things about his anxieties that he hasn't admitted to himself. Some interpretations suggest it represents guilt about considering abortion during Mia's pregnancy. The baby's fetal design and the mansion's exploration of parenting themes support this reading. The victim creates their own tormentor. Donna provides the mechanism. Ethan's mind provides the specific nightmare. The baby only exists because Ethan is terrified of being a bad father. But if one hallucination targeting parental guilt seems cruel, wait until you meet the bioweapon who was literally designed as a child and only wanted someone to love her, Eveline. Eveline was engineered as a bioweapon designed to infiltrate enemy territory and turn hostile forces into allies through mind control. And the only thing she actually wanted was a family that wouldn't abandon her. The connections created Eveline, codenamed E001, using mold samples supplied by Mother Miranda. She also contains DNA from Miranda's deceased daughter Eva, who died of Spanish flu in 1919. Born in the early 2000s, she was artificially aged to appear 10 years old for infiltration purposes. The bioweapons program, starting in 1997, aimed to create mind control weapons. 8 D-series prototypes died before Eveline's successful creation. Dahlia died at 309 119 days from rapid aging. Dolores committed suicide after killing D06 Diana and D07 Daniela. Datamined files reveal Eveline reportedly carried Dahlia's severed arm as a twisted memento, suggesting she formed attachments to her sisters. But then the cargo ship incident reveals what happens when a bioweapon feels rejected. On October 5, 2014, Agent Mia Winters posed as Eveline's mother aboard the Annabelle. A hurricane destabilized Eveline psychologically. When Agent Alan Droney called her a little bitch, she accelerated his infection to lethal speed, killed the entire crew, and infected Mia while vomiting mold throughout the ship. The Baker family tragedy shows what her powers actually do. Jack Baker rescued Eveline and Mia from the shipwreck wreckage near Dulvey, Louisiana. Within days, the entire family was infected and under her control. Jack's confession to Ethan states we're just regular people who got fucked over. All she wants is a family. The Bakers spent 3 years abducting homeless people and tourists to expand Eveline's family through forced infection. Here's the biological horror behind her loneliness. Eveline aged at 25 times the normal human rate without medication. By 2017, she appeared as an 80-year-old woman, confined to a wheelchair. Her body was failing, even as her desperation for family intensified. Her dying words after Ethan administers the toxin are, "Why does everyone hate me?" Eveline was created to destroy, rejected by Miranda as unsuitable, and abandoned by every caretaker. She forced people to love her because nobody would do so willingly. But if weaponized loneliness seems tragic, wait until you learn about the father whose mutating body actively hunted his own daughter while his dying consciousness screamed her name. William Birkin. William Birkin's G-Virus transformation represents the complete corruption of paternal instinct, and the most disturbing documented detail is that his mutating body instinctively hunted his daughter Sherry, while his dying consciousness still screamed her name. Birkin discovered the G-Virus in 1988 by studying Lisa Trevor's absorption of the Ne-alpha parasite. He spent a decade developing it at the Nest facility beneath Raccoon City. His research notes describe a vision of a new world utopia built with controlled G-infection. The virus was his life's work and his obsession. In September 1998, he planned to defect to the U.S. military with G-Virus samples. Umbrella's USS team, led by Hunk, intercepted him. Birkin was shot multiple times and left bleeding out on the laboratory floor. In desperation, he injected himself with his final G-Virus sample. But then the transformation reveals how the G-Virus actually works. Unlike the T-Virus, which kills and reanimates, the G-Virus causes continuous evolution through 5 documented stages. G1 Birkin retained intelligence and memories. He cried out Sherry's name and attempted to protect his daughter while fighting the virus's instincts. G2 sprouted a second head and diminished his human features. G3 destroyed all mental faculties and erased every memory of his former existence. G4 made his body too heavy for bipedal movement. G5 became a living lump of flesh and teeth with remains of not yet digested victims protruding from the mass. The biological horror is the hunting mechanism. The G-Virus drives hosts to seek genetically compatible hosts for embryo implantation. Only hosts with matching DNA can accept embryos without becoming G-mutants themselves. This means Birkin's body instinctively sought Sherry. His daughter was the most compatible vessel. Chief Irons was implanted with a G-embryo and transformed into a grotesque host. Sherry was infected but saved by the Devil vaccine. In Resident Evil 2 Remake, G1 Birkin's roars become less monstrous when his mutating arm briefly regresses. He screams, "Sherry, help me," and kill in alternating patterns. He occasionally pauses mid-combat to swing at thin air, or attempt to pry open the eye growing from his shoulder. The implication is clear. Part of him knows what his body is trying to do. But if corrupted paternal love seems tragic, wait until you meet the university student who reached for her sister's hand as she transformed into a monster, Deborah Harper. Deborah Harper's transformation in Resident Evil 6 lasted less than 3 minutes. And the most disturbing documented detail is that she retained enough consciousness to reach for her sister's hand as her body mutated in real time. Deborah was a university student, 4 years younger than her sister Helena Harper. When Helena shot Deborah's abusive ex-boyfriend, National Security Advisor Derek Simmons kidnapped Deborah as leverage. He forced Helena to help bypass President Benford's security for the Tall Oaks bioterror attack, promising Deborah's safe return. Despite Helena's compliance, Simmons ordered Deborah's termination. Members of the family, Simmons' secret organization, intervened. They wanted to observe what the C-Virus would do to her youthful, healthy body. For over an hour, researchers documented 0 visible transformation signs. Disappointed, the family evacuated before quarantine and abandoned Deborah in the underground laboratory. But then Helena and Leon found her apparently asleep and began carrying her to safety. Deborah suddenly combusted into flames while screaming in agony. Strange goo hardened over her body like a shell, forming a chrysalid cocoon. The cocoon cracked open. A mutated Deborah emerged. Before the transformation was completed, Deborah reached her hand out from the chrysalid toward Helena. Helena reached back. Their fingers almost touched before Ada Wong shot Deborah with a crossbow to prevent full mutation. Too late. The mutation finished anyway. Helena held her transformed sister and apologized repeatedly. Deborah began secondary mutation and violently pushed Helena away. The mutated form retained vestiges of her former beauty: humanoid physique, blonde hair, eyes without pupils. She sprouted claw-like tentacles from her spine and exhibited bizarrely sexual traits: suggestive giggling, seductively stroking her own body. The gentle personality inverted into something mocking intimacy. Here's what breaks established C-virus documentation. Every other C-virus transformation in Resident Evil 6 occurs instantly or during chrysalid dormancy. Victims are unconscious during mutation. Deborah remained conscious. She reached for her sister while her body transformed. That reaching hand suggests she knew exactly what was happening and tried to connect with Helena one final time. Helena grabbed Deborah's hand as she fell from a cliff edge. She apologized and promised never to cry until her sister was avenged. Then Helena deliberately let go, acknowledging her sister was gone. But if witnessing your sister transform seems horrifying, wait until you learn about the father who was experimented on by the children he created through genetic engineering, Nosferatu. Alexander Ashford was transformed into a mindless monster by the children he created through genetic engineering. And after 15 years chained in the Antarctic facility, he still recognized his son's voice screaming for help. Alexander, 6th Earl of the Ashford family and son of Umbrella co-founder Edward Ashford, became obsessed with restoring family prestige. He discovered the gene regulating intellect and extracted DNA from family matriarch Veronica's remains. He combined this with the intelligence gene and his own DNA to create twins Alfred and Alexia through artificial insemination. Alexia became a child prodigy, appointed chief senior researcher at Umbrella's Antarctica facility at age 10. Alfred had only slightly above average intelligence. Alexander grew horrified by his creation's complete disregard for human life. He hid the records documenting their artificial origins and created the linear launcher as a last resort weapon against Alexia if she ever threatened the world. But then in March 1983, Alfred and Alexia discovered the secret room revealing their origins. They learned they were created merely to revitalize the family rather than from love. Their revenge was immediate. They used their father as the first test subject for Alexia's T. Veronica virus. The experiment destroyed Alexander's brain but strengthened his body exponentially. He mutated into Nosferatu, a mindless, insane monster developing tentacle appendages from his back. The ant DNA in T. Veronica gave him Queen Ant traits. His cells gained infinite replication, granting him biological immortality without awareness or consciousness. Deemed a failed experiment by his own children, Nosferatu was chained in a straitjacket in the Antarctic base's secret room for 15 years. Workers documented hearing his roars echo through the facility night after night. Here's the detail that suggests he retained fragments of memory. In 1998, when Alfred was attacked and screamed for help, Nosferatu broke free from his chains. Some fragment of consciousness recognized his son's voice and responded to it. Alexander recorded a message before his transformation, begging whoever finds it to use the linear launcher to stop Alexia, proof he foresaw her threat. When Chris Redfield finds Nosferatu's corpse, Alexia dismissively states that's how she dealt with insignificant bugs. Her own father was reduced to an insect, but if family betrayal seems cruel, wait until you learn about the bioweapon intelligent enough to hunt specific targets, while the human host's consciousness is systematically erased. Nemesis T-type. Nemesis is intelligent enough to speak, plan ambushes, and operate rocket launchers, and the documented creation process reveals the human who once inhabited that body had their consciousness systematically erased and replaced by a parasitic brain. Umbrella Europe's 6th laboratory in France developed the NE-alpha parasite between the early 1980s and 1998 to solve the intelligence bottleneck. T-virus infection caused severe brain damage, making bioweapons uncontrollable. The parasite was engineered to replace brain functions while maintaining combat intelligence. The implantation process injects it at cellular level directly into the host's spinal cord. It moves toward and attaches near the medulla oblongata, consumes T-infected cells to grow exponentially, forms a unique brain resembling an enlarged human brain, erodes the central nervous system, destroys the frontal lobe completely, and modifies the neural network to link its brain with remaining body functions. But then the 1988 prototype testing reveals the connection to Lisa Trevor. The first functional NE-alpha killed every test subject within 5 minutes. Wesker and Birkin tested it on Lisa Trevor as a last resort. Lisa completely absorbed the parasite. It vanished into her bloodstream. This failure led directly to discovering the G-virus inside her body. Nemesis exists because of her suffering. The 1998 production model used a mass-produced T-103 Tyrant as the base. When researchers implanted the refined NE-alpha into the tyrant's spine, the parasite's tentacles ripped through the tyrant's face, right arm, right breast, and belly. Development staff had to staple the flesh back together. The tyrant lost its nose, lips, and right eye in the process. They dressed it in a bulletproof coat that functions as both protection and restraining jacket. Here's the documented intelligence level. Nemesis follows precise instructions, makes independent tactical decisions, and operates complex weapons requiring specialized knowledge. Upon spotting its target, it speaks the target's name, STARS. That's not mimicry. That's comprehension and verbal communication. The horror is what happened to the original host. The NE-alpha destroys the frontal lobe and overwrites all motor functions. Whatever human existed before is completely erased. Nemesis is conscious enough to speak and plan, but the person is gone. Resident Evil has spent nearly 3 decades perfecting a very specific type of horror. Not zombies jumping out of shadows, but the slow documented destruction of people turned into experiments against their will. From children used as test subjects, to families imprisoned inside their own bodies, to decades of torture that nobody outside a corporate lab even knew was happening. Today, I'm breaking down the 8 most disturbing character backstories in the Resident Evil franchise, ranked from deeply unsettling to absolutely unbearable, starting with a teenager who never got to finish growing up, Steve Burnside. Steve Burnside is the youngest person on this list, and that's exactly what makes his story hit different. He died at 17 years old, and everything terrible that could happen to a teenager happened within a single week. Born on May 14, 1981, Steve grew up as the son of an Umbrella Corporation employee. When his father got caught selling company secrets, Umbrella's response was total. They executed Steve's mother and threw both Steve and his father into the Rockfort Island Penal Facility, a remote prison camp run by the Ashford family. Steve was approximately 17 when the place went to hell. In December 1998, the HCF attacked Rockfort Island, triggering a T-virus outbreak that turned the entire prison population into zombies. Steve escaped during the chaos and met Claire Redfield, the first person to show him actual kindness in years. But the virus forced a confrontation Steve couldn't avoid. Deep in the facility, he found his father shambling toward him as a zombie. Steve shot his own reanimated father to survive, then collapsed crying. A kid who'd already lost his mother now had to destroy what was left of his dad with his own hands. Here's where it gets worse. After escaping to Antarctica, Steve was captured by Alexia Ashford, who chained him down and injected him with the T. Veronica virus while Claire watched. The transformation was immediate and brutal. Reptilian scales erupted across his skin, bone spurs tore through his shoulders, his body swelled into something monstrous, and he vomited blood as the virus rewrote his biology. Alexia handed him a massive axe and sent him to kill Claire, but something unprecedented happened. As Steve raised the axe over Claire, his feelings for her broke through the virus's control. He saved her instead, got impaled by Alexia in retaliation, and reverted to human form just long enough to die in Claire's arms. His last words were a confession, "I'm glad I met you. I loved you." He was 17, admitting his first love with his last breath. Even death wasn't the end. Albert Wesker stole Steve's corpse to extract the virus, and the body eventually got sold to a drug lord. Steve Burnside's final violation was becoming a commodity in someone else's deal. His story complete before he ever turned 18. But if you think a week of concentrated horror is bad, the next person spent their entire childhood watching their family fall apart. Donna Beneviento. Among the 4 lords in Resident Evil Village, Donna Beneviento is the quietest and easily the most tragic. This is a woman whose backstory reads less like survival horror and more like a case study in what happens when childhood trauma just keeps compounding with zero intervention. Born into the noble Beneviento family in an isolated Eastern European village, Donna suffered from severe social anxiety, made worse by a disfiguring facial scar. Her father was a doll maker, and he crafted a porcelain doll named Angie that became Donna Donna's only method of communication. She literally could not speak to other people directly, only through the doll, a coping mechanism born from psychological damage that would never be treated. Then the damage got worse. Mother Miranda, the century-old cult leader running the village, had been conducting Kadu parasite experiments on villagers for decades, searching for a vessel to resurrect her dead daughter Ava. Members of the Beneviento family were among her test subjects. Donna's relative Bernadette was killed during experiments in the 1950s. Another relative, Claudia, died the same way. The grief from watching their family members die in Miranda's experiments drove Donna's parents to kill themselves, leaving their already fragile daughter completely alone in the Beneviento estate. Miranda then turned to Donna herself, implanting the Kadu parasite directly into the orphaned girl. Donna survived, but Miranda's notes are devastating. She dismissed Donna as underdeveloped and too mentally ill to serve as Eva's vessel. Miranda kept Donna as a lord not because she cared, but because she was useful. For Donna, this was yet another parental figure who looked at her and decided she wasn't good enough. The Kadu amplified everything wrong with Donna. She retreated completely into isolation. Populating her home with animated dolls, she cultivated hallucinogenic flowers whose pollen could induce terrifying hallucinations in anyone who entered her domain. When Ethan Winters arrived searching for part of his dismembered daughter, Donna stripped him of all weapons through hallucination and unleashed the baby, a grotesque fetal monster that chased him through the basement in what fans consistently call the most psychologically terrifying sequence in the entire franchise. But Donna's death is what cements the tragedy. When Ethan finally cornered her, she didn't fight back. She begged him not to leave. This woman, orphaned by suicide, disfigured, experimented on, dismissed as worthless by her surrogate mother, isolated for years with only dolls for company, wanted one thing: for someone to stay. Ethan stabbed the Angie doll 3 times with scissors, only realizing too late that he'd been stabbing Donna herself. She calcified and crumbled apart. Donna Beneviento never chose to be a villain. She was manufactured into one by a lifetime of abandonment, and she died still reaching for a connection nobody ever offered her. At least Donna's suffering was mostly psychological. The next 2 people discovered their entire existence was a lie built into their DNA. The Ashford twins. Alexia and Alfred Ashford from Resident Evil Code Veronica present a horror that's not about viral mutation, but about the fundamental violation of what it means to be human. They were not born, they were engineered. Their father, Dr. Alexander Ashford, was desperate to restore his declining family's reputation within Umbrella Corporation. His solution was Project Code Veronica, a genetic experiment where he extracted DNA from the embalmed corpse of his ancestor, Veronica Ashford, combined it with a gene-controlling human intellect, and implanted the embryos in an unnamed surrogate mother. The twins were born around 1971 as products of eugenics, designed to be intellectual weapons. Alexia was the intended success, a child prodigy who graduated university at 10 and became Umbrella's youngest chief senior researcher at the Antarctic facility. Alfred was the unintended byproduct, possessing only slightly above average intelligence, forever inadequate beside his sister. Japanese developer guides confirm that Alexander's genetic tampering accidentally warped both twins' psychological architecture, producing extreme narcissism and sociopathy from birth. They were incapable of normal empathy, not because of choice, but because of a design. Their only genuine emotional bond was with each other. Isolated from scholars by age and from children by intellect, they existed in a social vacuum. The breaking point came in February 1983, when 12-year-old Alfred discovered a hidden room containing all of Alexander's research archives. The files revealed everything. They were clones. Alexander viewed them as experiments rather than children. Their entire existence was instrumentalized. Both twins captured their father and injected him with the T. Veronica virus, which Alexia herself had created by combining the progenitor virus with an ancient virus extracted from queen ant DNA. Alexander mutated into a mindless, howling creature called Nosferatu and was locked in a subterranean cell beneath the Antarctic facility, where he remained alive and in agony for 15 years. Alexia, having watched her father's failed transformation, deduced that the T. Veronica virus required 15 years of cryogenic stasis to properly bond with a host. In December 1983, she injected herself and entered cryosleep, entrusting Alfred to guard her. What followed was Alfred's complete psychological disintegration. Left utterly alone, his only human connection frozen in a tube, Alfred developed dissociative identity disorder. He created an alternate personality modeled on Alexia. He dressed in her clothes, spoke in her voice, and held conversations with a sister who existed only in his fracturing mind. He ruled Rockford Island as an unstable dictator for 15 years, unaware his dialogues with Alexia were hallucinations. When Alfred finally activated Alexia's thawing process, he was mortally wounded. She awoke to find her twin brother dying in her arms, cradled him, and sang a lullaby. Her subsequent rampage was driven partly by grief. The Ashford story is Resident Evil's most complete meditation on eugenics. Two children manufactured without the capacity for normal humanity, who discovered their creator saw them as instruments, and whose response was to become exactly the monsters they were designed to be. But at least the Ashfords were born broken. The next family started out completely normal, and that's what makes their fate so much worse. The Baker family. The Baker family's backstory in Resident Evil 7 inverts the franchise's usual formula. Most characters become monsters through injection or infection, and then cease to be themselves. Jack, Marguerite, and Zoe Baker remained conscious inside their corrupted bodies for nearly 3 years, fully aware of every atrocity they committed while powerless to stop it. Before October 2014, the Bakers were an ordinary Louisiana family on a Dulve Parish plantation. Jack was a military veteran. Marguerite was a devoted homemaker. Their son Lucas showed troubling signs. He'd killed a childhood friend as a boy, but Jack and Marguerite were fundamentally caring people. When Hurricane Greta washed the tanker carrying the bioweapon, Eveline and her handler Mia Winters ashore, Jack rescued both from the wreckage and brought them into his home. His compassion was the vector of his family's destruction. The Daughters DLC depicts the night everything changed with devastating clarity. Eveline, a child-shaped weapon that spreads psychotropic mold through physical contact, began infecting the family one by one. Marguerite turned violent first, then briefly regained control and begged Eveline not to hurt her family, shoving car keys at Zoe and screaming at her to run. Jack tried to drown the infected Marguerite, then stabbed himself, then dragged a screaming Lucas toward Eveline. Lucas's cries echo through the DLC as the last words of the Baker family as they existed before. For nearly 3 years, from October 2014 to July 2017, the Bakers abducted, tortured, butchered, and cannibalized over 100 victims. Marguerite's body mutated to birth and control insects from a hive that replaced her lower torso. Jack became a regenerating horror who could survive having half his face destroyed. They held Mia Winters captive, kidnapped tourists and homeless people, and served human remains at a dinner table that became one of the franchise's most iconic images. The most devastating moment comes midway through RE7, when Ethan encounters Jack in a vision. Jack speaks calmly, lucidly, and politely. The real man, surfacing momentarily from beneath Eveline's control. He explains that he and Marguerite lapse in and out of awareness, helplessly watching themselves commit horrors from behind their own eyes. He asks Ethan to stop Eveline, and in an extraordinary moment of empathy, expresses pity for the bioweapon child, a good man, trapped inside a monster, feeling compassion for the creature that imprisoned him. Zoe Baker's parallel horror is quieter but equally harrowing. She somehow retained her free will despite infection, spending 3 years alone among her insane family, secretly helping victims escape via whispered phone calls. When Eveline discovered Zoe's resistance, she accelerated the mold inside Zoe's body until she calcified, a punishment for loyalty to her own humanity. Zoe was eventually rescued in the end of Zoe DLC by Jack's brother Joe, but the family she knew was gone. The Baker's story endures because it answers a question most zombie fiction avoids. What if the person was still in there, watching, the entire time? Speaking of being trapped in your own body, the next person fought through 2 entire games without realizing he'd already died in the first 10 minutes. Ethan Winters. Ethan Winters occupies a unique space in Resident Evil, an ordinary man subjected to extraordinary mutilation who discovers in his final moments that he stopped being a man years ago. Born around 1984, Ethan was a systems engineer in Los Angeles who married Mia Winters in 2011, completely unaware that she was a covert operative for The Connections, a crime syndicate specializing in bioweapons. When Mia vanished during the 2014 tanker incident, Ethan spent 3 years believing she was dead. The physical toll Ethan endures across Alphas RE7 and RE Village is the most extreme sustained bodily destruction any protagonist survives in the franchise. In RE7 alone, Mia chainsawed off his left hand and Zoe Baker stapled it back on. Jack Baker severed his leg. He was beaten, stabbed, and dragged through the Baker estate. He was seated at a table of human remains and force-fed rotting food. In RE Village, the damage escalated beyond reason. A lichen bit off 2 fingers within minutes of arrival. The Dimitrescu daughters impaled both hands on meat hooks. Lady Dimitrescu sliced off his left hand entirely. She tasted his blood and called it stale, a clue players wouldn't understand until the finale. His right hand was also severed. He was fed through industrial rotating blades. He was stabbed repeatedly throughout the village. The revelation that recontextualizes everything arrives near Village's climax. Ethan was killed by Jack Baker during their very first encounter in RE7, the moment Jack stomped on his head in the guest house. The mold reanimated Ethan's body, turning him into a sentient molded construct. He had been technically dead for 3.5 years without knowing it. Every reattached limb, every survived impalement, every impossible recovery, all of it was the mold, holding together a corpse animated by sheer paternal determination. Capcom's Collector's Edition art book is literally titled The Tragedy of Ethan Winters. The final act strips away even this borrowed existence. Mother Miranda ripped Ethan's heart from his chest, and he still fought on, his mold body finally reaching its limit. After Miranda's defeat, Ethan's form began disintegrating. Regeneration exhausted. He handed baby Rose to Chris Redfield, told Chris to teach her strength, and detonated an explosive to destroy the Megamycete, sacrificing what remained of his borrowed life. The title card reads, "The father's story is done." In the Shadows of Rose DLC, Ethan exists only as a consciousness preserved within the Megamycete's memory realm. He appears to his 16-year-old daughter Rose as a figure called Michael, guiding her through dangers one last time before a final farewell. The tragedy is layered. Ethan's wife's secret career caused his original death. He fought across 2 games to protect a family built on deceptions, and he discovered the truth about himself only in the moments before he ceased to exist entirely. He was designed as an everyman, no combat training, no special forces background, which makes every wound land harder. Ethan Winters is what happens when an ordinary person's love collides with a world that treats human bodies as disposable material. At least Ethan got to live as a man before becoming something else. The next person never had that chance, because she was grown in a lab and programmed to be a weapon from day one. Eveline. Eveline, designated E001, is Resident Evil 7's central antagonist and its most tragic figure simultaneously. A child engineered for destruction who spent her brief existence desperately seeking the one thing her creators ensured she could never have, she was developed by the Connections using a sample of the mold provided by Mother Miranda, combined with DNA from Miranda's deceased daughter Eva. Eveline was grown in a laboratory, artificially aged to appear as a 10-year-old girl, and programmed for a single purpose: infiltrate civilian populations, schools, refugee camps, government buildings, and use mind control via mold secretion to neutralize targets without combat. Unused game files reveal the human cost of perfecting this weapon. Eveline was preceded by at least 8 failed prototypes, the D-Series, designated D001 through D008, all young girls, most of whom died horrific deaths. The clinical log entries read like an atrocity ledger. Decrepit at 319 days. Infection, suicide, one prototype killed another. One was disposed of due to poor performance. Eveline was the first E-type specimen stable enough to deploy, built on a foundation of dead children. Her design carried a critical flaw that would define her suffering. Without periodic injections of a control serum, the mold accelerated Eveline's cellular aging, degraded her cognitive function, and destabilized her powers. She was a weapon with an expiration date, requiring constant pharmaceutical maintenance to remain functional. In October 2014, the Connections attempted to transport her aboard the cargo ship LNG Annabelle, with handlers Mia Winters and Alan Droney posing as her parents. During a hurricane, Eveline destabilized. She infected the ship, killed Alan, who had called her a little bitch, and caused the tanker to crash in Dolby, Louisiana. What followed was 3 years of accelerating decay. Jack Baker rescued Eveline from the wreckage and brought her home. Within weeks, she had infected the entire Baker family, bending them into a mind-controlled surrogate family. Eveline forced the Bakers to abduct strangers so she could expand her family, a grotesque parody of the domestic love she was biologically programmed to crave, but genetically incapable of receiving through normal means. Without her medication, observation logs from Lucas Baker document her visible deterioration. By mid-2016, she was coughing constantly, losing hair, and aging at an alarming rate. Her daily routine, per Lucas's notes, she just plays with dolls all day. By early 2017, the 10-year-old had aged into an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her body collapsing around a child's mind. When Ethan Winters injected her with the E-necrotoxin, Eveline's final words were a child's plea. "Why does everyone hate me?" She transformed into a massive molded structure and was destroyed, a weapon that outlived its usefulness, discarded by creators who never saw her as human. Mother Miranda, who had provided the original genetic material, rejected Eveline as an imperfect vessel for Ava, adding yet another layer of parental abandonment to a life defined by it. An in-game scientist's note puts it simply: someone sentimental might interpret her actions as a lonely kid trying to make up for a lifetime spent in an impersonal lab. Eveline is Resident Evil's most complete expression of a theme that runs through the franchise, that the real horror isn't the monsters, but what people do to children in pursuit of power. But if you think being engineered as a weapon is disturbing, the next person was just a normal 12-year-old when her father stopped being human and started hunting her. Sherry Birkin. Sherry Birkin's story across Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 6 is a masterclass in compounding trauma, each phase of her life worse than the last, each supposed rescue leading to new exploitation. Born around 1986 to doctors, William and Annette Birkin, Sherry's childhood was defined by absence. Both parents were consumed by their work as Umbrella Corporation virologists at the Arklay Laboratory, and later at the underground nest facility beneath Raccoon City. Sherry essentially raised herself, her parents too obsessed with developing the G-Virus, a progenitor virus strain intended for Umbrella's eugenics program, to provide basic parental care. The night of September 29, 1998, destroyed what little normalcy Sherry had. The USS infiltrated William Birkin's lab to seize the G-Virus. Birkin was shot multiple times, but in desperation injected himself with a sample. The virus transformed him into a cascading series of increasingly monstrous forms, the creature known simply as G. The botched raid caused T-virus samples to leak into Raccoon City's sewer system and water supply, triggering the citywide zombie outbreak that would end with the government sterilizing the city via thermobaric missile. 12-year-old Sherry fled to the Raccoon City Police Department on her mother's orders, clutching a locket containing a hidden G-virus sample. The station was already overrun. She encountered Claire Redfield, who became her protector, the first adult to prioritize Sherry's safety over viral research. But Sherry's father, mutating beyond recognition, stalked them through the sewers and underground passages. William Birkin, now a grotesque mass of exposed muscle, bone, and eyeball-studded flesh, no longer recognized his daughter as his child. The G-Virus's reproductive imperative identified Sherry only as a compatible host. In a scene that remains one of the franchise's most disturbing, the creature that was once her father implanted a G-Virus embryo inside Sherry's body, attempting to reproduce through his own 12-year-old daughter. Sherry's condition deteriorated rapidly as the embryo grew. Claire raced her to nest and administered the devil vaccine just before full transformation, halting the mutation but leaving permanent alterations to Sherry's genome. During this nightmare, Sherry watched her mother Annette die from injuries, hearing Annette's final words, an apology for not being a good mother, a deathbed admission that arrived years too late. Rescue brought no relief. The U.S. government took Sherry into custody, and because trace amounts of the G-Virus remained in her blood, along with antibodies of immense scientific value, she was subjected to years of daily experiments and medical testing. Her legal guardian was assigned as Derek Simmons, a manipulative national security advisor who used Sherry as leverage to force Leon Kennedy's cooperation as a government agent. Claire Redfield visited when she could, providing the only emotional stability in Sherry's adolescence. But Sherry's teenage years were spent as a government laboratory specimen. She was not a ward of the state. She was an asset, her blood more valuable than her well-being. The G-Virus remnants gave Sherry regenerative abilities. She could survive impalement and heal rapidly, but this biological gift made her blood a target. It was later used by scientist Carla Radames to engineer the C-Virus, deployed in the 2012 to 2013 global bioterrorist attacks that killed tens of thousands. Sherry's body, violated by her father at 12, became the source material for one of the franchise's most devastating weapons. In RE6, now 26, Sherry was captured alongside Jake Muller and subjected to another 6 months of experimentation by Neo Umbrella. The cycle repeated. Survive horror, be rescued, become a test subject again. Sherry eventually became a capable federal agent, but the architecture of her trauma is staggering. Neglected by her parents, parasitized by her own father, orphaned, imprisoned, experimented on through her entire adolescence, used as political leverage, and then having her very blood weaponized into a global catastrophe. Every institution that was supposed to protect her, family, government, science, instead extracted something from her body and called it progress. But as horrific as Sherry's story is, it happened over years with periods of relative safety in between. The final person on this list experienced 28 consecutive years of torture, and the last thing she did before dying was search for a mother who'd been dead the entire time, Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor's backstory, revealed through scattered documents and encounters in the 2002 Resident Evil remake, is the franchise's definitive tragedy, a horror so complete in its destruction of a human being that series creator Shinji Mikami specifically designed her so players would feel sympathetic and guilty for fighting her. Community consensus across Reddit threads, fan analyses, and gaming publications is nearly unanimous. Lisa Trevor is the most disturbing character backstory in Resident Evil history, and one of the most harrowing in all of video games. Lisa was born around 1953, the daughter of architect George Trevor and his wife Jessica. George's firm was commissioned by Oswell E. Spencer to design the Spencer Mansion in the Arklay Mountains, an elaborate estate concealing underground laboratories. When the mansion was completed in 1967, Spencer invited the Trevor family to stay as guests. It was a trap. On approximately November 10th, 1967, 14-year-old Lisa and her mother Jessica were seized by Spencer's guards and taken to the underground cavern laboratory. George was separately imprisoned in the mansion's labyrinthine corridors. Jessica and Lisa were injected with type A and type B strains of the progenitor virus, a retrovirus Spencer believed could drive human evolution. Jessica reacted poorly and was executed within 3 days, discarded as a failed experiment while her daughter lay in the next room. George Trevor wandered his own architectural creation until he starved to death, his final diary entry recording the discovery of his own tombstone, placed there by Spencer before the family even arrived. The trap had been planned from the beginning. Lisa, at 14, was now an orphan in a basement laboratory, and no one outside those walls knew she existed. Lisa reacted positively to the progenitor infection, developing superhuman strength and regenerative abilities that made her medically unprecedented and therefore invaluable. For the next 28 years, from 1967 to 1995, Lisa Trevor was kept underground as a perpetual test subject, a living canvas for every experimental pathogen Umbrella's researchers could devise. She was chained to her bed, fed intravenously, and moved by wheelchair between testing stations. In 1978, Dr. William Birkin injected her with an Ne alpha-type parasite. Her body absorbed it entirely, an unprecedented reaction that inadvertently produced the biological precursor to the G virus, one of the most devastating bioweapons in the franchise. In 1988, further extraction from her blood yielded insights contributing to what would become the Golgotha virus. Lisa Trevor's unwilling body was the wellspring from which Umbrella's worst creations flowed. The psychological deterioration documented across her in-game diary entries is among the most disturbing pieces of writing in the franchise. Early entries are coherent. A confused teenager asking where her mother went, why she can't leave, when she'll go home. The handwriting progressively degrades across years of entries, sentences fragmenting, words becoming illegible, the cognitive architecture of a human mind collapsing under decades of viral experimentation. The final entries are nearly unreadable scrawl. The last comprehensible phrase, repeated across multiple entries, "Where is Mom?" This question drove Lisa's most horrific behavior. Desperate to control their volatile subject, Umbrella periodically sent female researchers, disguised as Jessica, to pacify Lisa, but some fragment of Lisa's damaged mind recognized the deception every time. She became convinced these women had stolen her mother's face. Her response was to tear it off. Lisa killed multiple researchers across the years, ripping their faces from their skulls and stitching them together into a grotesque mask she wore over her own mutilated features. Layered faces of dead women, worn by a girl searching for her mother underneath them. At least 3 researchers were killed this way by 1995. Her living quarters contain mutilated dolls, artifacts of both rage and a yearning for the childhood stolen from her at 14. After the G-Virus was successfully extracted, Umbrella lost interest. In 1995, the USS was ordered to execute Lisa Trevor. They shot her, waited 3 days, and declared her dead. Her regenerative abilities brought her back. Her body was dumped in the Arklay Mountains, where she survived as a feral figure for 3 years, a woman in her 40s with the broken mind of a teenager, wandering the woods above the laboratory where she'd spent most of her life. During the 1998 Mansion incident, STARS members encountered Lisa as a shambling, moaning figure draped in her mask of faces, virtually indestructible and emitting sounds that were equal parts rage and grief. Mikami designed the encounters so that players could choose not to fight her, a deliberate choice to emphasize that she was a victim, not a villain. In the final encounter, when Jessica's coffin is opened, Lisa approaches, sees her mother's remains, and utters a single word, "Mother." She takes the skull, cradles it, and throws herself into the chasm. After 28 years of searching, she found what was left of Jessica and chose to follow her. The community finds Lisa Trevor most disturbing, not because of any single element, but because of the totality. A child victim, body horror, psychological decay, face collecting, 28 years of unbroken suffering, loss of identity, loss of humanity, and a finale that offers recognition without redemption. She found her mother. Her mother was Bones. She jumped. Every single enemy on this list used to be a person. That's the part nobody thinks about when they're unloading a shotgun into something that won't stay dead. Resident Evil has been quietly building some of the most disturbing origin stories in gaming for nearly 3 decades, and today we're breaking down the 10 worst, starting with one that only gets worse the more you think about it. 10 Regenerators. Here's what most people remember about Regenerators: the breathing. That awful, labored, wet breathing that starts before you even see them. But here's the thing, that breathing might not just be a design choice. It might be accurate. Regenerators weren't grown in a lab. They were people. Specifically, they were political prisoners and so-called undesirables, collected by the Los Illuminados cult under Osman Sadler in rural Spain. Zero trial, zero documentation, zero chance. Sadler's people deliberately infected these prisoners with Las Plagas parasites, which burrowed into their spinal columns and granted them that signature regenerative ability. Shoot off an arm, it grows back. Pump 12 rounds into the torso, the flesh just knits itself together. The only way to actually kill one is to target the parasite eyes hidden along the spine, which you can't even see without a thermal scope. But the detail that keeps people up at night is the vocalizations. Regenerators don't roar, they wheeze, they moan, they make sounds uncomfortably close to a human being in extreme pain. Some players have pointed out that these noises sound less like a monster and more like someone trying to scream through a body that no longer works. Which raises a question nobody wants answered. Are they still aware in there? Because if they are, then what Sadler created wasn't a bioweapon. It was a punishment. Not executed, not imprisoned, repurposed, which is, not ideal. And that's only number 10. If conscious political prisoners trapped inside regenerating meat suits is where we're starting, brace yourself. Because up next is a creature whose transformation might have been even slower, far more agonizing. 9. Lickers. Most people see a licker and just think scary, skinless thing with a tongue, which, fair enough, but the real horror isn't what they are. It's what they were about 12 hours earlier. Lickers are the end result of extreme secondary mutations in T-virus infected humans, not lab experiments, not engineered bioweapon, regular people. We're talking Raccoon City police officers, office workers, shop owners, people who woke up that morning and commuted to work. The T-virus hit them and then their bodies just kept going, kept mutating, kept degrading long past the point where death would have been a mercy. Here's the thing about that transformation. It wasn't instant. The T-virus doesn't just snap its fingers and turn a traffic cop into a skinless predator. It's a drawn-out, multi-stage process of total biological collapse. First the skin starts dissolving, then the eyes deteriorate until they're completely gone. Structural integrity just falls apart, leaving behind this emaciated thing that should be dead 10 times over but isn't, because the virus is literally the only thing keeping its organs functioning. And the worst part? Their hearing becomes hypersensitive. That's not random. That's the body attempting sensory reassignment, desperately trying to replace the eyes it no longer has, which means the biological systems are still adapting, still problem solving, which raises a question that nobody wants to sit with for too long. Were they conscious through it? Because if the brain is still functional enough to reorganize entire sensory pathways, there's zero guarantee the parts responsible for awareness just conveniently shut off first. Picture a Raccoon City beat cop, fully aware, feeling his skin dissolve off his body over the course of hours, feeling his eyes stop working, feeling his bones restructure, unable to scream in any way that sounds human anymore. That's not a monster, that's a person trapped inside one, but at least a licker's suffering eventually ends with its humanity. The next entry on this list, he never got that luxury. 8. Mr. X. Most Resident Evil monsters have a tragic origin. Someone got bit, someone opened the wrong door, someone was in the wrong place when the outbreak hit. Mr. X doesn't get that luxury. There's nothing accidental about him. He's a product, a line item on a budget spreadsheet somewhere in Umbrella's corporate headquarters. Someone in a boardroom approved his creation, someone else signed the purchase order, and a third person probably filed the paperwork. The Tyrant program was Umbrella's attempt at building the perfect super soldier, and Mr. X was one of its flagship results. Genetic engineering, T-virus mutation, cloning, the whole package. But here's the thing that nobody really stops to think about. The Tyrant program needed base genetic material. It needed a starting point, and that starting point was a human being. Umbrella sourced that material from their own people. Sergei Vladimir, a loyal Umbrella officer, provided his own genetic material for the cloning process. His body happened to be one of the rare few compatible with the T-virus at the level needed to produce a Tyrant, so Umbrella did what any reasonable corporation would do and cloned him repeatedly to manufacture an army of obedient super weapons. Where'd you get the 7-foot-tall murder machine? Oh, him? Don't worry about it. What makes Mr. X genuinely unsettling isn't the leather coat or the footsteps echoing behind you in the RPD. It's the tactical awareness. He doesn't stumble around like a zombie bumping into furniture. He tracks you. He makes decisions. He chooses routes and anticipates movement. That's not mindless programming. That's cognition. And if there's cognition, there might be a fragment of something human buried underneath all that viral mutation, some echo of the original genetic template. Fully aware but completely unable to stop any of it. The final insult is what Umbrella actually deployed him for. They didn't send Mr. X to fight a war or protect civilians. They sent him to Raccoon City to clean up their own mess. A weapon cloned from a loyal soldier, stripped of identity and autonomy, then thrown into a dying city to contain the failures of the very corporation that created him. He's not a monster. He's an employee who never got a choice. But if corporate engineered nightmares disturb you, wait until you hear about the Umbrella co-founder who refused to stay dead. 7. James Marcus. Here's a fun thought experiment. Imagine you help build one of the most powerful corporations on the planet. You're a co-founder. Your name is on the paperwork. You helped create the science that made the whole thing possible. Now imagine your business partners decide you're a liability and have you murdered. That's already a betrayal of the highest order. But for James Marcus, death was just the beginning of the nightmare. Marcus co-founded Umbrella Corporation alongside Oswell E. Spencer and Edward Ashford. He wasn't some mid-level researcher who got unlucky. He was one of the 3 pillars holding the entire company up. And during a corporate power struggle, the kind where boardroom politics get settled with bullets instead of votes, his own organization had him killed. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. They didn't just kill him and move on. His body was left to rot, but the leeches he'd been experimenting on had other plans, because of course they did. This is Umbrella. Nothing stays dead the way it's supposed to. Marcus's remains were absorbed by a queen leech organism, creating a human leech chimera that should not exist in any sane universe. His body fused with a writhing colonial entity, producing something that was neither fully James Marcus nor fully leech, but some horrible intersection of both. And the worst part? The resulting creature showed signs of retaining Marcus's memories, personality fragments, behavioral patterns tracing back to the man he used to be. The canonical evidence on specifics is thin and inconsistent across source materials, which honestly makes it more unsettling, because we don't know how much of Marcus survived in there. Was it a full consciousness trapped inside a leech hive mind, screaming into a biological prison, or just echoes, like a recording playing on loop inside something that couldn't understand what it was hearing? Nobody can say for sure, and that ambiguity is the horror. This man was denied the basic dignity of staying dead. His partners murdered him, his leeches consumed him, and whatever came out the other side might have remembered every betrayal, experienced from inside a body made of thousands of squirming parasites, which is, not ideal. But if you think being betrayed by your own company and turned into a leech colony is bad, wait until you hear what Umbrella did to create their ultimate weapon. 6. Nemesis. Nemesis wasn't an accident. He wasn't some scientist who tripped into a vat of something horrible. He was built on purpose, with a specific job and a specific kill list. After the STRS team survived the mansion incident in the first game, Umbrella decided that traditional bioweapons weren't cutting it against trained operatives, so they engineered something smarter, something that could hunt. Here's what makes Nemesis different from every other tyrant. He was infected with the NET-type parasite, which granted him regenerative abilities, enhanced cognitive function, and the genuinely terrifying capacity to mutate and evolve in response to damage. Every time you hurt him, the parasite kicks in, repairing and reshaping his body into something worse than before. He's not just a weapon, he's a weapon that gets better at being a weapon the longer you fight him, and that's where things get uncomfortable. See, most bioweapons in Resident Evil operate on instinct, they shamble, they attack, they die. Nemesis doesn't do that. He prioritizes targets. He adapts his tactics when something doesn't work. He learns from failure and changes his approach. That's not programming. That's problem solving. That's something disturbingly close to genuine intelligence trapped inside a 9-foot biological missile. But the creepiest detail, the one that still has fans arguing decades later, is the voice. That single guttural word he repeats over and over: stars. Now, Umbrella would tell you that's target identification software, a programmed vocalization to confirm pursuit parameters. Cool, but here's the thing. If it's just programming, why does it sound like obsession? Why does it sound like a conscious being fixated on the one purpose it was given, or repeating it like a mantra because it's the only word it has left? Nobody knows for certain whether Nemesis originated from a human subject or was grown synthetically from scratch. And that ambiguity is the worst part, because if he was once a person, then somewhere inside that mass of muscle and parasite and rage, there might be someone who knows exactly what they've become. A soldier who never enlisted, fighting a war he didn't choose, hunting people whose only crime was surviving. At least Nemesis had a purpose, though. William Birkin had something worse. He had a choice. 5. William Birkin. Here's the thing about William Birkin. He wasn't some mad scientist cackling in a lab. He was genuinely one of the most brilliant biochemists Umbrella ever produced, and he knew exactly what the G-Virus was capable of, because he built it from the ground up. Every protein fold, every mutagenic property, every horrifying possibility. He understood all of it, which makes what happened next so much worse. When Umbrella's security forces showed up to seize his research, Birkin had about 30 seconds to make an impossible choice. Let them take everything he'd spent his career building, hand over the most dangerous biological weapon in human history to people he knew would misuse it, or inject himself with his own incomplete creation. He chose the needle. And the thing is, you don't just watch William Birkin become a monster. You watch him become 5 different monsters. His transformation across Resident Evil 2 happens in stages, each boss encounter revealing a body that's further gone than the last. First encounter, he's still recognizably human. Giant mutated arm, sure, but you can see his face. You can see a man in there. By the final form, there's nothing left, just a writhing mass of teeth and tissue that barely fits in the room. The player is literally watching a man lose himself in real time, and the game forces you to be the one pulling the trigger at every stage. But here's where it gets genuinely heartbreaking. Throughout the entire game, Birkin's actions appear driven by one corrupted impulse. Find Sherry, his daughter. The G-Virus didn't erase his paternal instinct. It twisted it into something unrecognizable. A loving father who would have done anything to protect his little girl became the single greatest threat to her survival, and some part of him kept trying anyway. He couldn't stop reaching for her even after he'd become the thing she needed protecting from. That's the real horror of William Birkin, not the mutation, not the body horror. The fact that his scientific brilliance and his love for his daughter became the exact weapons that destroyed everything he wanted to preserve. He created the virus to secure his family's future. He injected it to keep it out of the wrong hand, and every choice he made out of love or principle led directly to the nightmare that consumed him. Not all monsters start as villains. Some of them start as fathers who ran out of options. But if you think a man destroying himself is disturbing, wait until you meet the thing locked in the basement of the Ashford estate. 4. Nosferatu. I need to be upfront about something. Nosferatu is different from every other entry on this list. Most creatures we've covered have detailed backstory, lab reports, journal entries, corporate memos, something concrete telling you exactly who they were and what happened. Nosferatu has almost none of that, and that's exactly what makes it so unsettling. Nosferatu appears in Code Veronica as this towering vampire-like creature chained up beneath the Ashford estate, aristocratic features still visible through the mutation, supernatural abilities that go beyond standard T-Virus antivirus degradation, and a level of psychological sophistication, suggesting this thing isn't just a mindless bioweapon. Something is still in there, something that remembers. Here's the thing. The creature is actually Alexander Ashford, father of the twins Alfred and Alexia. He was experimented on by his own children after they discovered his role in the genetic experiments that created them. They injected him with the T. Veronica virus, and when the transformation went wrong, they didn't put him down. They chained him in the basement of their Antarctic facility and left him there for years. But even knowing that, the game gives you almost nothing about what Alexander experienced during those years. No journal entries from his perspective, no recordings of his deterioration. The franchise just locks the door and walks away. And that void is the horror, because you can see it in the design. The remnants of aristocratic bearing and a body twisted beyond recognition. The way it moves, with something resembling purpose rather than mindless aggression. Someone important was consumed by this transformation. Someone with status, with family, with a name. And the game refuses to let you fully understand what that person went through. You get the before and the after, but the middle, the actual experience of a father being mutated and imprisoned by his own children, stays locked away. Community debate around Nosferatu often splits into two camps. Some fans argue the mystery itself is the point, that deliberately withholding Alexander's experience creates a uniquely psychological horror. Others counter that without backstory depth, Nosferatu can't carry the same tragic weight as entries like Birkin or Lisa Trevor, where you know exactly what was lost. Both sides have a point, but there's something deeply uncomfortable about a creature that clearly used to be someone, and a franchise that decided you don't get to know who. Not fully. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what they tell you, it's what they deliberately leave out. But if Nosferatu's horror lives in the unknown, our next entry is the exact opposite. Jack Baker's tragedy is laid bare for everyone to see, and honestly, that might be worse. 3. Jack Baker. Here's the thing about Jack Baker that makes him different from almost every other entry on this list. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a soldier, he wasn't some corporate executive who got what was coming to him. Jack Baker was just a dad, a regular guy living a quiet life in rural Louisiana with his wife, Marguerite, his son Lucas, and his adopted daughter Zoe. The man's biggest problems before all of this were probably a leaky roof and property taxes, and then Eveline showed up. What makes Jack's story so uniquely cruel is the speed at which it happened, which is to say, slowly, agonizingly slowly. He didn't get bitten by a zombie and turn in 30 seconds. The mold infection crept in through environmental contamination, piece by piece. A headache here, a mood swing there, skin that didn't look quite right, thoughts that didn't feel like his own. He would have had time to notice something was wrong, time to fight it, time to fail. And the worst part? Evidence throughout Resident Evil 7 suggests Jack retained conscious awareness during his transformation. This man likely watched himself become a monster, felt his mind slipping away, felt his body warping into something grotesque, and couldn't do a single thing to stop it, all while his wife and children were going through the exact same nightmare right next to him. But here's where it gets genuinely heartbreaking. Jack's violent behavior throughout the game, the relentless pursuit, the screaming, the welcome to the family, son routine. Some players have theorized that none of it was random aggression. It was corrupted protectiveness. Think about it. Before infection, Jack's entire identity revolved around being the head of his household, keeping his family together, and when the mold twisted his mind beyond recognition, that core drive didn't disappear. It just broke. His desperate attempts to drag Ethan into the family, to keep everyone at the dinner table, to maintain household unity through violence, those might have been the last fragments of a loving father trying to hold everything together through the only means his shattered brain could still process. The infection didn't just destroy Jack Baker, it weaponized his love. It took the best thing about him, his devotion to his family, and turned it into the very mechanism of their suffering. Every act of violence was potentially an act of care, filtered through a mind that no longer understood the difference, which is, not ideal. He wasn't a villain. He was a hostage inside his own body, watching his hands do things his heart would never allow. But if Jack's story is what happens when a bioweapon destroys a family from the inside, wait until you hear about the bioweapon that was designed to do exactly that from birth. 2. Eveline. Every other other entry on this list started as a person. They had names, families, lives that were stolen from them. Eveline never had any of that. She was born a weapon, literally engineered from the ground up as a bioweapon in the shape of a little girl, and that distinction changes everything. Here's the thing. Eveline wasn't a human who got infected. She wasn't a scientist who made a bad call or a prisoner who got experimented on. She was created by the Connections, a criminal organization working with HCF, specifically to be a walking, talking, biological weapon. Her entire cellular structure was built around the mutamycete mold organism. Every part of her, from her childlike appearance to her apparent vulnerability to the way she looked up at you with big, sad eyes, was a deliberate design choice. Not evolution, not accident, engineering. And the engineering was brilliant in the most horrifying way possible. Eveline could produce mold spores that infected anyone nearby, but that wasn't her primary function. Her real weapon was empathy. She was designed to make people feel sorry for her. A scared little girl, alone, desperate for a family. Every protective instinct you've ever had as a human being, that was her attack vector. The moment you felt bad for her, you were already infected. Which brings us to the Baker family. Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, Zoe. A normal family living in rural Louisiana who made the mistake of taking in what looked like a shipwrecked child. And Eveline didn't malfunction when she destroyed them. She didn't go rogue. She performed exactly as designed. The Bakers' psychological degradation, their physical mutations, their complete destruction as a family unit, that was the intended outcome. That was the product working as advertised. But here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Eveline displayed what appeared to be real loneliness, real desperation for connection. She wanted a family, kept trying to build one, kept getting upset when people rejected her. And the question nobody can answer is whether any of that was real. Did she actually feel lonely? Did she genuinely want to be loved? Or was even her apparent sadness just another programmed exploitation vector? A feature designed to make her more effective at breaking down human defenses? Because if her emotions were real, she's the most tragic thing in this franchise. A child who could never be loved without destroying whoever loved her. And if her emotions were fake, she's something worse. A perfect simulation of a suffering child built specifically to weaponize your compassion against you. Either answer is a nightmare. Every other creature on this list had their humanity taken from them. Eveline was never given any to begin with, and honestly, I don't know which is worse. But there's one entry left, and if Eveline represents the horror of never having humanity, the final spot belongs to someone who had hers stripped away piece by piece over decades. 1. Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor was a little girl. That's it. That's the detail that makes everything else about her story unbearable. Before the mutations, before the experiments, before the decades of suffering in underground lab, she was just a kid, and Umbrella took her anyway. Lisa was captured alongside her mother by Umbrella Corporation when she was still a child, brought to their underground research facility, and separated from the only family she had. From that moment forward, her entire existence became one continuous experiment. The T-virus, the G-virus, countless other experimental strains that never even made it to production. They pumped every single one of them into this girl's body over and over for decades. Here's where it gets worse. Lisa didn't die. She should have. Every other test subject exposed to even a fraction of what she endured either died or mutated beyond biological function within weeks, but Lisa's body didn't reject the viruses, it absorbed them. Every strain Umbrella tested on her became part of her, layered on top of the last, turning her into a living archive of every horrible thing they'd ever created. Her survival wasn't a blessing, it was a death sentence that never arrived. Because the moment Umbrella realized she could withstand anything, she became the most valuable test subject they'd ever had. The logic is sickening but simple. She can survive more, so we do more. Her ability to live through the pain was the exact reason they never stopped inflicting it, but she was still in there. That's what separates Lisa from every other creature on this list. The journal entries, fragmented, barely coherent writings found throughout the facility that describe her mental state across years of imprisonment, through every injection, every mutation, every day spent in that underground nightmare, some part of Lisa Trevor remained conscious enough to write, to remember her mother, who she watched succumb to the same infections, who transformed and died in front of her while Lisa herself could not follow, could not die, could not leave, could not do anything except continue existing in a body that had long since stopped resembling the child she used to be. She was in those labs longer than most people watching this video have been alive. Let that settle for a second. Most of us haven't been on this planet planet as long as Lisa Trevor spent being experimented on in a basement. There's a reason the Resident Evil community consistently names her the single most tragic figure in the entire franchise. Not the scariest, not the most dangerous, the most tragic. Because Lisa Trevor was never a monster. She was a little girl who never got to grow up, never got to leave, and never got to die, and nobody came to save her. I don't really have a neat way to wrap that up. I don't think there is one. Resident Evil Village has some of the most horrifying enemies in the entire franchise. But the thing is, most people never look past the surface. They see a werewolf, they shoot it, they move on. Today I'm explaining the disturbing lore behind every major enemy in this game, starting with the one that seems the least scary, but reveals something genuinely unsettling about how this village operates. 10. Urias. Here's the thing about Urias that nobody talks about. He's not a Lycan. He looks like one. He fights like one. But the game deliberately classifies him as something entirely separate. Urias is a manufactured creature, engineered through bioweapon development programs overseen by the Four Lords and Mother Miranda herself, and that distinction matters more than you'd think. See, the Lycans are what happens when Cadu infection runs wild. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and the results vary from person to person. Urias is different. He's the result of controlled, deliberate biological modification. Someone sat down, followed a protocol, and produced this thing on purpose, which is, not ideal, but here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Urias has a name. Not a human name, a classification name. He occupies a catalog position in a bestiary of created organisms. Think about what that implies. You don't catalog something unless you're making enough of them that you need a filing system. You don't assign specimen designations unless individual creations have become routine enough to require organization. This isn't one mad scientist creating one monster in a basement. This is an industrial scale operation where transforming humans into weapons became so normalized that they needed spreadsheets. The Four Lords had established protocols for this, procedures, presumably paperwork. The horror isn't in what Urias is. It's in the fact that he's entry number whatever in a database full of things just like him. And that's just the baseline. Because if even the least disturbing creature on this list implies a factory line approach to human modification, wait until you hear what they did with the failures. 9. Moroica. There's something uniquely horrible about being stuck halfway through a process. Not finished, not reverted, just frozen in the middle of becoming something else. That's Moroica, a creature that exists in the biological equivalent of a loading screen that will never hit 100%. Here's the thing. Moroica isn't a monster in the traditional sense. It's not a successful transformation. It's not a functional bioweapon. It's what happens when the process breaks down and nobody bothers to clean up the mess. The creature occupies this grotesque middle ground between human and something else entirely, bearing characteristics of both while achieving the full function of neither. It's stuck in a permanent state of becoming, which sounds almost poetic until you realize what that actually means for the thing experiencing it. And that's the part that gets under your skin. For every Urias that came out of those experiments looking like a finished product, there had to be dozens of these. Failed prototypes, incomplete transformations, creatures that didn't meet whatever twisted specifications the Four Lords had in mind. The success rate for this kind of experimentation was clearly abysmal, which means the village was essentially a factory floor littered with biological rejects. But here's where it gets dark. They kept it alive. Whatever Moroica is, whatever half-formed nightmare it's trapped inside, someone made the deliberate decision not to terminate it, not out of mercy, obviously, because mercy would have been a bullet. No, they preserved it, either because they wanted to study what went wrong, or because they simply did not care enough to walk over and end its suffering, which is, not ideal. That means Moroica exists in a perpetual state of modification with no endpoint. No completed transformation waiting at the finish line. No reversal back to whatever it was before. Just an eternity of being wrong, of being incomplete, of being a living error that nobody thought was worth correcting or destroying. But if Moroica represents a single failed experiment preserved in amber, wait until you hear about the Lycans, where the failure rate went industrial. 8. Lycans. Here's the thing about Lycans that nobody wants to sit with for too long. They weren't born. They weren't bitten under a full moon. They were neighbors, farmers, parents, regular people living in a village who got fed a parasite by the one person they trusted most. Mother Miranda distributed the Kadu parasite across her entire village population. Not as punishment, not as defense, but as raw material for her grand experiment. Every single person infected became an involuntary test subject in a program they never knew existed. One day you're tending crops, the next you're sprouting fur and teeth and the overwhelming desire to tear apart anything that moves. But here's where it gets complicated. The Lycans aren't mindless, not even close. They coordinate attacks, flank targets, use weapons, set ambushes. That's not animal instinct. That's tactical thinking. That's a brain remembering how group dynamics work, how to cut off escape routes, how to overwhelm a target through organized pressure. The human minds inside these things didn't vanish. They adapted, and I can prove it. Some Lycans retain the ability to speak. Fragmented words, broken sentences, but coherent human language coming out of creatures that look like they should only be capable of snarling, which is, not ideal. Because if some of these things can still talk, still think clearly enough to form words and attempt communication, that raises an extremely uncomfortable question about every other Lycan in the game. How many of them were screaming internally? How many retained full awareness of what their body was doing, while the parasite drove them toward violence they couldn't stop? Every coordinated pack attack might represent dozens of trapped human consciousnesses watching themselves hunt, unable to override the compulsion. You killed maybe 100 of these things across a single playthrough. Any one of them could have been a person begging for help in a voice you'd never hear. Cool. Add that to the list of things I didn't need to think about at 2 a.m. But if trapped consciousness inside a monster sounds bad, wait until you see what happens when someone removes the consciousness entirely and just keeps the body. 7. Soldats. Here's the thing about the Lycans. As horrible as their transformation is, it happened to people living their lives. They were villagers, farmers, families. The Kadu found them where they existed and twisted them into something else. The Soldats are a completely different kind of nightmare because they were made on purpose. Every single Soldat you encounter in Resident Evil 8 exists exclusively in laboratory environments and storage facilities, not wandering the village, not hunting in packs, stored, contained, filed away in rooms that look less like dungeons and more like warehouses, because that's exactly what they are. Inventory. The name itself tells you everything you need to know. Soldat is military terminology. Soldier. Not a name, not even a species classification, a product designation. Whatever these people were before they ended up on Heisenberg's operating table. Their names, their histories, their entire identities got replaced by a generic military label and a number. They went from being someone to being something, from a person to a line item in a production manifest. And the production line nature of it is what makes this genuinely disturbing rather than just gross. One act of cruelty is a crime. 100 identical acts performed according to documented specifications is a manufacturing process. Heisenberg didn't snap and do something horrible to one person. He developed a protocol, refined it, and then applied it over and over and over again until he had enough units to fill a storage facility. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. But here's where it gets worse. Some of those containment units house soldats that appear biologically alive, despite showing zero behavioral complexity. No movement, no response, no apparent utility whatsoever. They're just sitting there, breathing. Which raises the obvious question, why keep them? If they failed as weapons, why not terminate them? The answer, probably, is that Heisenberg didn't stop experimenting on them just because they stopped being useful. They graduated from product to test subject without ever passing through person again. At least the Soldats can't tell you what happened to them. The next entry involves someone who absolutely can, and that makes everything infinitely worse. 6. Donna Beneviento. Every other lord in this game was either forced into transformation or tricked with promises of power. Donna was tricked with something worse. She was tricked with the promise of not being alone anymore. Here's the thing about Donna that makes her section hit different from everything else in Village. The horror isn't body horror. There's no grotesque transformation to point at. No fishman body, no 9-foot vampire frame. The horror is entirely psychological, and it starts long before Mother Miranda ever showed up at her door. Donna Beneviento lost her entire family. The specifics are deliberately vague, but the result is crystal clear. Profound, crushing isolation. A woman left completely alone with nothing but grief and a house full of dolls. And Mother Miranda, being the cosmic scale predator she is, identified this vulnerability with surgical precision. She didn't threaten Donna, she didn't overpower her, she offered her family. Let me explain why that's worse. When you coerce someone through force, there's at least clarity. The victim knows they're a victim. What Miranda did was fundamentally different. She positioned herself as salvation. She appeared to a grieving, isolated woman and essentially said, I can give you connection again. I can make you part of something. And the price was letting Miranda fundamentally alter her body and mind. Can you give informed consent when you've been deliberately made desperate? When the person offering to save you is the same person proposing to change what you are at a biological level? The answer feels like no. And then there's Angie, the doll her father made before he died, which Donna later imbued with biological capability and treats as a genuine relationship. On one hand, this demonstrates remarkable intelligence. On the other hand, clinging to your dead father's last gift so intensely that you animate it into a surrogate companion suggests a psychological break that never healed. She was so alone that she literally brought her childhood doll to life, just to have someone to talk to. The uncomfortable truth is that Donna exists as both victim and perpetrator simultaneously. She was exploited through her loneliness, manipulated into accepting transformation she likely couldn't meaningfully consent to, but she also deploys hallucinations against intruders. She is functionally a monster, just one whose monstrousness grew directly from wounds someone else inflicted. But if you think Donna's recruitment was cruel, wait until you hear what Miranda promised Salvatore Moreau, because that one might actually be sadder for me. 5. Salvatore Moreau. Salvatore Moreau is the only lord in Resident Evil Village who seems to genuinely hate what he's become. And honestly, that makes everything about him so much worse. Here's the thing about Moreau. The guy knows exactly what he looks like. He's fully aware that his body has been twisted into this fish-like, bloated, half-aquatic nightmare, and he hasn't made peace with it, not even a little bit. He copes the way a lot of people in unbearable situations cope. He drinks constantly, actively trying to blur the edges of a consciousness that won't stop reminding him of what he is, which is, you know, not ideal. But before you start feeling too sorry for him, let me explain how he got here. Mother Miranda implanted the Kadu parasite in Moreau, just like she did with all the lords, searching for a vessel compatible enough to resurrect her daughter Eva. Moreau wasn't compatible, not even close. But instead of discarding him, Miranda kept him around, and Salvatore latched onto her with this desperate, childlike devotion. He calls her mother. He craves her approval constantly. He's painfully aware that she doesn't love him, that he's the least favored of her lords, and that knowledge eats him alive. Turns out, no amount of devotion fixes that. What Salvatore got was a body that repulses everyone, including himself, and a position at the bottom of a hierarchy that openly mocks him. Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, Donna, they all look down on him. He knows it. He sits in his reservoir, alone, rejected, clinging to the one scrap of belonging Miranda throws his way. The rejection was total. Miranda got what she needed from him, and Salvatore got a lake, a bottle, and a body he can't stand to exist inside. Now here's where the sympathy collapses entirely, because despite being a victim of one of the cruelest deceptions in the entire game, Salvatore didn't just sit in his misery alone, he maintained captive populations within his domain. Living people, subjected to forced transformation, breeding programs, directed personally by Salvatore himself, the guy who knew exactly how horrific unwilling transformation felt because he lived it every single day, turned around and inflicted that exact same nightmare on others. That's the gut punch. Victimhood didn't prevent him from becoming a monster. It gave him the blueprint. His entire trajectory is the perpetuation of trauma made flesh. A man broken by forced transformation, who internalized that suffering so completely that he became the very thing that destroyed him. He didn't just fail to break the cycle, he perfected it. But if you think Moreau's story is disturbing, wait until you hear about 3 women who never even got the chance to say no. 4. The Dimitrescu daughters. Here's a question nobody asks about Cassandra, Daniela, and Bela. When they dissolve into a swarm of insects, do they die? Because that's what's actually happening. These 3 can metamorphose their entire physical body into a collective of parasitic organisms. Not partially, not aesthetically. They literally disintegrate into hundreds of individual bugs, fly around as a distributed cloud of parasites, and then reform into a humanoid shape. And everyone just kind of accepts this as a cool vampire power without stopping to think about what that actually means for the person inside. Here's where it gets complicated. If a unified consciousness persists across the swarm, that means your awareness is simultaneously spread across hundreds of separate organisms with no central nervous system connecting them. You're experiencing existence as a fragmented collective. Your sense of self is distributed across creatures that could, theoretically, fly in different directions. That's not a superpower. That's a nightmare. But the alternative is worse. If consciousness does not persist in swarm form, then every single transformation is death. Full stop. The person dissolves, ceases to exist as a coherent mind, and then reforms with memories intact but no actual continuity of experience. They die and are reborn every time they transform, repeatedly, possibly dozens of times per day, and they'd never even know it was happening, which is, not ideal. But the disturbing lore doesn't stop at the metamorphosis. There's the family structure itself. The daughters exhibit extreme emotional distress when threatened with separation from Lady Dimitrescu. They physically cannot tolerate cold air, which destroys their swarm cohesion. Their entire existence depends on remaining within specific environmental parameters inside the castle. That's not a family dynamic. That's biological containment. Whether these three are actual biological daughters who were subjected to forced parasitic integration, or artificially created entities engineered to fill the role of children, the result is identical. The family bond isn't built on love or genetics. It's built on parasitic dependence. They literally cannot leave. Their bodies won't let them. Every moment of apparent affection exists within a framework where separation means death. Mom, can I go outside? No, sweetie. You'll disintegrate into 1,000 bugs and die forever. The conditioning runs so deep that it's impossible to distinguish genuine emotion from engineered biological response. And that might be the most disturbing part. Not that the family is fake, but that you genuinely cannot tell whether it's real or manufactured. The parasites made the question unanswerable. But if you think the daughters have it bad, wait until you hear about the woman who made them this way. 3. Lady Dimitrescu. Every other lord in this game has an excuse. Moreau was desperate, manipulated by a mother figure who exploited his loneliness. Donna was isolated, traumatized, psychologically broken down until she accepted transformation as salvation. Heisenberg was coerced and spent his entire tenure actively plotting rebellion against Mother Miranda. They were all victims first, and monsters second. Alcina Dimitrescu was not a victim. Here's the thing about Lady Dimitrescu that makes her fundamentally different from every other lord in the game. She came to the table with power already. She was nobility. She had wealth, status, and influence before Mother Miranda ever approached her. She didn't accept transformation out of desperation or manipulation. She negotiated it from a position of strength. She wanted this, and she got exactly what she asked for. And what did she do with it? She built a harvesting operation. The castle doesn't just contain victims. It integrates them into its functioning hierarchy. Human beings are collected, bled, and processed as part of a sustained system that Alcina maintains with what can only be described as enthusiasm. This isn't someone being forced to commit atrocities under duress. This is someone who designed the supply chain, who staffed the operation, who clearly, demonstrably enjoys the process of predation, with full cognitive awareness of what she's doing. But here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. The daughters. Alcina's role as mother figure to 3 parasitized individuals raises a question the game never fully answers. Does she actually believe she's their mother? Or does she know exactly what she did to them and simply performs the role of loving parent while fully aware that she subjected them to forced parasitic transformation and repackaged it as family? Either answer is horrifying. If she genuinely believes it, she's delusional on a scale that makes her unpredictable. If she doesn't, she's consciously perpetrating one of the cruelest deceptions in the entire game, dressing up biological violation as love. And the fundamental question underneath all of this, the one that actually keeps people up at night, is whether the transformation made her cruel, or whether it simply removed the constraints that kept pre-existing cruelty contained. Because if the monster was always there, just waiting for permission to emerge, then Alcina Dimitrescu isn't a tragedy. She's a confirmation that some people just need an opportunity. The internet's obsession with her is, honestly, kind of proving the point. 9 feet tall, attractive, commands a castle. Nobody wants to talk about the blood drains in the basement, which is, not ideal. But if you think a willing predator is disturbing, wait until you meet the thing in Donna Beneviento's basement that doesn't even have the decency to look like a monster. 2. The baby. There's a moment in Donna Beneviento's section of the game where every player puts their controller down and says the same thing. What am I looking at right now? And then, about 3 seconds later, wait, is that a baby? It is. Or at least, it was. The entity you encounter is explicitly categorized as an infant, not a creature that vaguely resembles one. Not a monster with baby-like features slapped on for creep factor. An actual infant, maintaining infantile behavioral patterns, infantile cognitive responses, infantile emotional attachment, all housed inside something that has been physically accelerated to enormous size. The body grew. The mind didn't. Here's where it gets genuinely difficult to talk about. If this thing represents what the game implies it represents, a naturally conceived human baby subjected to deliberate accelerated development and parasitic transformation, then we're looking at potentially the single worst atrocity committed in the entire game. And this is a game where people get turned into fish monsters and dissolved into insect swarms. But those victims were adults. They had lives, identities, agency that was stolen. This is something that never even got the chance to develop those things. The violation targets the most fundamentally helpless category of human being possible. And the worst part isn't the body horror, it's the feelings. The creature demonstrates genuine emotional attachment to Donna Beneviento. It shows distress when she's threatened. It reaches for comfort. These aren't programmed combat behaviors or parasitic hunting instincts. These are the responses of something that can feel. Something that experiences fear and love and confusion. Something that is psychologically an infant, regardless of what its body looks like, which creates a complete breakdown of every normal moral response you'd have to an enemy in a video game. Your survival instinct says, this thing will kill me. Your moral framework says, this is a baby that someone did this to, and it's scared. Both of those things are simultaneously completely true. It is utterly helpless in psychological terms and extraordinarily dangerous in physical terms. There is no correct way to feel about it. I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes the horror isn't in the jump scare. Sometimes it's in realizing that something enormous and monstrous is crying because it wants its mother. But if the baby represents someone's experiment gone right, wait until you hear about the woman who designed the entire system. The one who made all of this possible on purpose. 1. Mother Miranda. Every single thing we've talked about in this video, every atrocity, every transformation, every violation of body and mind, traces back to one woman. And I'm using the word woman loosely, because here's the thing about Mother Miranda that nobody wants to sit with for too long. She stopped being human over a century ago. Not in any way we understand the word. The conventional reading of Miranda is straightforward enough. Grieving mother discovers the Megamycete, a massive fungal superorganism, becomes obsessed with resurrecting her dead daughter Eva, builds a cult, creates the Four Lords, terrorizes a village. Bad lady does bad things. Simple. But the deeper you dig into her lore, the more disturbing that reading becomes. Consider what we actually know. Miranda has existed since around 1919, when she first made contact with the Megamycete after Eva's death during the Spanish flu. She demonstrates capabilities that far exceed anything the Kadu parasite grants her subordinates. She can shapeshift into virtually anyone. She can manipulate entire communities across generations. She operates across a century-long timescale with terrifying patience. And here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Her consciousness isn't purely her own anymore. It's entangled with the Megamycete, a fungal network that stores the consciousness of every person it's ever consumed. A hive mind wearing a human face. The implication buried in the game's late-stage revelations is that Mother Miranda isn't simply a grieving mother anymore. She's a woman so deeply fused with an ancient fungal intelligence that the boundary between her will and its influence has dissolved entirely. She carries over 100 years of accumulated knowledge, methodology, and cold calculation. But the thing informing her decisions draws from something far older and far less human than she is. If you sit with that, everything changes. The Four Lords aren't just the victims of one cruel woman's experiments. They're the latest subjects in a research program that has been running for over a century, each one selected with surgical precision. Vulnerable people systematically identified, their specific weaknesses cataloged and weaponized. Donna's loneliness and mental illness, Salvatore's deformity and desperate need for approval, the daughter's youth and dependency. Miranda didn't stumble onto these vulnerabilities. She selected for them, deliberately, across decades of practice. And the philosophical horror underneath all of it is the worst part. If Miranda's consciousness is entangled with the Megamycete, if that fungal network absorbs and stores every mind it touches, then what does that say about everyone she infected? Every Kadu host, every lord, every lichen, every creature we've discussed today, they all carry pieces of that same mold inside them, which means none of them are entirely their own anymore. Their thoughts, their impulses, their very sense of self, threaded through with something ancient and collective. Not ever again.
Resident Evil has spent 28 years hiding something far worse than zombies beneath the surface of every outbreak. Every mutation, every failed experiment, every victim who couldn't die revealed a pattern nobody wanted to acknowledge about what these viruses actually do to human consciousness. That's why today, I'm ranking the 8 most disturbing organisms in Resident Evil history and explaining exactly why they break you. Starting with the creature that punishes you for thinking the threat is over. Lickers and Crimson Heads. You kill a zombie and walk away, believing you're safe. And that's exactly when the T-Virus activates the second phase of infection that Umbrella spent years trying to suppress. The VACT process triggers when infected corpses enter dormancy. The virus doesn't just reanimate tissue, it completely reconstructs the host's cellular structure while the body lies motionless on the ground. Crimson Heads emerge with restored motor function, increased aggression, and claws sharp enough to decapitate humans in single swipes. The Arklay Laboratory VACT researchers note from July 1998 describes what happened when scientists tried feeding one. 4 researchers died in what the file calls an instant bloodbath. The lab had to be sealed, but then the virus kept evolving. Lickers represent the final stage of T-Virus Epsilon strain infection. When zombies enter starvation hibernation, their brains begin expanding rapidly inside the skull. The growth doesn't stop when it runs out of space. The brain tissue ruptures through bone, shattering the skull from the inside and erupting outward as exposed gray matter. Every layer of skin dissolves, revealing reformed musculature designed for quadrupedal hunting. The skeletal structure warps to force the body onto all fours. Human hands become talons. Eyes stop functioning entirely, covered by the swelling brain mass. Players discovered something in the Licker research files that Umbrella tried to hide. The transformation doesn't destroy consciousness immediately. Zombies retain selective memories, which is why they mill around locations familiar to their human lives. During the VACT process, hosts experience periods where they lose and regain awareness. The Biohazard 2 development notes suggest the most terrifying possibility. Some part of the victim might still be present during transformation, trapped inside a body that's tearing itself apart and rebuilding into something that hunts by the sound of breathing. The tongue mutation occurs last. It extends to over 6 feet, develops enough tensile strength to pierce Kevlar, and according to the RCPD autopsy reports, can literally peel skin from victims in strips. But if brain tissue erupting through shattered skulls seems horrific, wait until you learn about the virus that judges your entire genetic code and finds you unworthy. Ouroboros rejected hosts. Albert Wesker designed Ouroboros to separate humanity into 2 categories in under 60 seconds. And the virus achieves this through a selection process that tears 99% of hosts apart from the inside out. Ouroboros operates on brutal binary logic. The virus develops an orange sensory core immediately after injection. Black leech-like pustules sprout from this core and begin consuming the host's internal organs. Within seconds, the virus evaluates the subject's genetic compatibility. For those Wesker considered genetically superior, the pustules integrate with existing tissue and grant superhuman abilities. For everyone else, the pustules run completely out of control. The host body becomes merely a vehicle for writhing black tentacle masses that consume everything they touch. But then you see what rejection actually looks like in real time. Excella Gione believed herself genetically perfect. As CEO of Tracell Africa and Wesker's closest collaborator, she expected to become one of the chosen. Her screams echoed through the Tricell tanker as Ouroboros tore her apart. The pustules consumed her body, then merged her remains with a pile of dead Magini corpses scattered across the deck. The resulting creature, Ouroboros Aheri, grew into a tree-like monstrosity several stories tall. Her face remained visible in the biomass, twisted in permanent agony. Chris and Sheva required a satellite laser to destroy what she had become. The Kajuju test subjects documented in the Tricell files show even worse fates. Rejected hosts experienced sweating, labored breathing, and confusion while remaining fully conscious. They knew something was wrong. They felt the pustules tearing through organs, and they stayed aware long enough to understand they had been judged unworthy before the tentacles ripped them apart completely. Research notes confirm the virus makes its genetic evaluation in under 1 minute, determining complex genetic superiority faster than any biological process should allow. That impossibility condemned thousands to deaths that lasted just long enough for them to understand why. But if instant genetic judgment seems cruel, wait until you see what happens when mutation occurs in real time during combat. Javo and C virus complete mutations. The C virus transforms humans into intelligent soldiers in under 60 seconds. And when you damage them in combat, their bodies mutate instantly into something worse right in front of you. Javo retain nearly all human intelligence after infection. They speak coherent sentences, operate complex firearms, drive vehicles, and coordinate tactical assaults. Neo Umbrella deliberately engineered this cognitive preservation to create the perfect bioweapon soldier. The transformation occurs in less than 1 minute after injection. Victims experience facial restructuring as extra eyes tear through skin in random locations, weeping blood as compound insect-like eyes emerge across their faces. Some develop 2 additional eyes, others grow 5 or more in asymmetric patterns that destroy any remaining humanity in their appearance. But then, you shoot one and discover the real horror of C virus engineering. Damaged body parts don't die, they mutate in real time during active combat. Shoot a Javo's arm and watch it transform into a blade-like scythe called Ruka SRP, capable of bisecting humans in single strikes. Damage the head and beetle pincers may erupt from the skull, forming Glavasmec mutations strong enough to lift and tear armored soldiers in half. The Lanxiang incident reports describe faces growing on each side of the clamp-like head, watching victims as the pincers close. When total damage exceeds the body's threshold, Javo either bursts into flames or enters the chrysalid stage. Inside the cocoon, the C virus dissolves the host's entire body into biological paste. Every bone, organ, and tissue breaks down completely. Then the virus rebuilds the genetic material into complete mutation species with 0 human features remaining. The creature called Rasclapangi emerges as 4 separate organisms sharing one consciousness. 2 autonomous hands, an upper torso, and independent legs operate as a single entity. The hands crawl independently to suffocate victims. The legs spray concentrated acid. When the body is destroyed, the actual parasite emerges from what remains of the host's mouth to implant embryos that develop into new Rasclapangi in minutes. Deborah Harper retained enough awareness during her complete mutation transformation to recognize her sister Helena before insect appendages erupted from her spine. But if watching bodies mutate during combat seems impossible, wait until you learn about the parasite that turns entire villages into puppets who might still be watching through their own eyes. Las Plagas Ganados. Las Plagas doesn't kill its host or destroy the brain, and that's exactly what makes it more disturbing than any virus in the franchise, because the victims might still be conscious inside. Ganados retain everything that makes humans functional. They farm crops, maintain equipment, operate vehicles, write coherent notes, and perform complex religious rituals. Village Chief Vitores Mendez maintains sophisticated social leadership over the entire community. The merchant, confirmed infected by Capcom developers, somehow retains complete autonomy and assists Leon Kennedy throughout his mission. Luis Serra's research documents describe the plaga affecting the parietal lobe, which controls sensory processing, while paralyzing the frontal lobe responsible for emotion, reasoning, and moral judgment. But then, you read what the parasites actually do to human consciousness. The infection process takes approximately 8 hours after initial exposure. Victims experience fever, coughing, convulsions, and periods of lost time they cannot account for. Luis Serra's memo references real-world parasites like Dicrocolium dendriticum that hijack ant nervous systems to control behavior. His notes suggest Las Plagas achieves something far more sophisticated in human hosts. Dominant plaga carriers like Osmond Sadler issue commands commands through high-frequency sounds undetectable to human hearing. Every infected host obeys instantly, suggesting a hive mind connection. The community repeats their final orders obsessively. Ganados, who were farmers before infection, continue farming. Those who were religious continue chanting prayers. Leon and Ashley experience their own infections as violent convulsions and coughing blood. Sadler demonstrates the ability to cause excruciating pain remotely without speaking, just by willing it. Here's what breaks every established explanation. Some Ganados show signs of internal conflict. They pause mid-attack as if fighting invisible restraints. The Biohazard 4 Incubate booklet reveals something worse. Children injected with plagas died. Every single child. Their bodies could not survive the infection. The village ending credits show sketches of children who once lived there, now gone forever. When Ganados die, Type C plagas can separate from the host corpse and survive independently as 8-legged spider creatures. These emerged from high-ranking monks infected longest, suggesting the parasite grows stronger the longer it controls a host. Nobody knows if the original personalities are suppressed, destroyed, or trapped watching themselves commit violence they cannot stop. But if parasitic control seems horrifying, wait until you see the bioweapon that regenerates from any damage while breathing like something that's suffering. Regenerators and Iron Maidens. The Regenerador doesn't announce itself with roars or footsteps, and the heavy, raspy, labored breathing echoing through the island laboratory corridors is the only warning you get before it finds you. That breathing was deliberately designed to maximize psychological terror. It sounds like respiratory distress, like a body struggling to maintain basic functions, like something trapped inside fighting to breathe. Players have debated for 19 years whether that sound indicates residual human consciousness or just damaged lungs forcing air through mutated tissue. The Japanese guidebook states the brain has completely transformed with no human thought capability remaining, but the breathing persists through every encounter. Regenerators are created by implanting multiple Las Plagas parasites into single human corpses. The April 9-13 subject analysis file from the RE-Free 4 remake documents their creation. The researcher wrote he had created new life with incredible metabolic capacity. Unless every parasite residing within the organism is destroyed, tissue regenerates indefinitely. The researcher compared himself to Frankenstein before adding a final note. The subject went wild, escaped its cryogenic tank, and he realized he was the real fool. But then you see what escaped regenerators actually do. Case file 2002-F documents a single escaped specimen that caused 7 deaths and 19 injuries over 20 hours. Recovery teams found 6 bodies. The 7th was never recovered. Security footage showed the Regenerator had absorbed the human corpse and a metal tool into its own mass. The victims weren't just killed, they were integrated. The organisms appear as gray, hairless, genderless humanoids, with permanent drooling grins full of fang-like teeth. They have no ears or nose. Their eyes glow red like bubbles about to burst. Arms stretch unnaturally to snatch prey from impossible distances. Limbs blown off by shotguns regrow visibly in under 10 seconds. Bodies riddled with bullets heal completely while they shamble forward, breathing that labored rasp. Iron Maidens are specialized combat variants covered in retractable needle-like spikes. Named after the medieval torture device, they don't bite victims. They pull prey close and impale them on hundreds of spikes simultaneously. Upon death, Iron Maidens explode in bursts of spikes that damage everything nearby. Destroying all plagas in a standard Regenerador can trigger transformation into an Iron Maiden, spawning a new plaga in the head. The breathing never stops, even as they regenerate, even as they die. But if unkillable bioweapons seem nightmarish, wait until you meet the father who hunted his own daughter while screaming her name. G-Virus Mutations. William Birkin retained enough consciousness through his first transformation to scream his daughter's name, and he spent the next week hunting her to implant an embryo while whatever remained human slipped away in stages. On September 22nd, 1998, USS operatives fatally shot Birkin during a G-Virus recovery operation at the Nest Laboratory beneath Raccoon City. Dying on the floor of his own lab, Birkin injected himself with the virus he had spent 15 years developing. The transformation began immediately. His right arm, where he was shot, grotesquely increased in muscle mass. A blood-red eyeball emerged from his shoulder, but critically, he retained intelligence and personality in this first stage. He used a metal pipe as a weapon, pursued the operatives who shot him and devoured G-virus samples to keep them safe from recovery. But then security footage captured something that divided the RE community for decades. G1. Birkin was documented screaming two phrases repeatedly, "Help me," and "Sherry," his daughter's name. Cutscenes show him appearing to protect her before G instincts overwhelmed rational thought. The question nobody can answer is how much of William Birkin understood what he was becoming while he still had a mouth capable of forming her name. G2 stage arrived within hours. Birkin's original skull was destroyed as his face and scalp melded into his torso. A new head grew from the shoulder. A lamprey eel mouth began forming in his chest. Complete loss of personality occurred here. The virus replaced identity with pure biological imperative. G3 stage erased almost all human features, leaving only a patch of skin on the torso where Birkin's face used to be. By G4 stage, degradation had begun. The breeding instinct was replaced by constant hunger. Birkin consumed zombies and lickers in the sewers, their partially digested limbs visible extending from his body as he stalked the underground. The G-virus compels hosts to seek blood relatives for reproduction. G-embryos are implanted through victims' mouths via chest tentacles. Compatible hosts become second-generation G-mutants. Incompatible hosts experience chest-bursting rejection as the embryo tears free as a larval creature. Police Chief Brian Irons and journalist Ben Bertolucci both died screaming as their chests exploded with larval G-adults. Birkin, driven entirely by G-instinct, hunted his 12-year-old daughter Sherry through the sewers to implant an embryo. Without the devil vaccine, she would have transformed. Instead, she became essentially immortal with regeneration abilities that stopped her aging. But if a father hunting his daughter seems tragic, wait until you learn about the girl who suffered conscious mutation for 31 years. The Megamycete and Molded. The Megamycete doesn't just kill you and reanimate your corpse. And after Mother Miranda touched it in 1919, she discovered every person who died near the village for over 1,000 years still exists inside it. The fungal supercolony functions as what Miranda's laboratory files call a biological computer, capable of data storage. When someone dies in proximity to the mold, their genetic structure and consciousness are absorbed and cataloged. Miranda experienced this firsthand when she touched the Megamycete searching for her daughter Eva, who died of Spanish flu. She saw the memories of hundreds, potentially thousands of people preserved in the fungal network, their personalities, their thoughts, everything they were, trapped in a hive mind that predates human civilization in that region. But then, Resident Evil Village revealed something that recontextualizes the entire previous game. Ethan Winters died in the Baker house attic at the beginning of Resident Evil 7. Jack Baker killed him during their first encounter. The game never shows you recovering from that attack because you didn't. Ethan's body was reconstituted entirely from mold after he had already been exposed through infected Mia. He survived having his hand severed twice, his heart ripped out by Miranda, and dozens of fatal injuries because his body was never human tissue. It was fungal matter mimicking human form. The inventory screen literally shows mold visible inside his reattached hand. Eveline's ghost confirms it. You died in that house 3 years ago. Your whole body is nothing but mold. Ethan remained completely unaware he was a walking corpse for 3 years. His consciousness persisted within the Megamycete even after his physical death, helping his daughter Rose in the shadows of Rose. DLIC years later. The molded creatures are formed by combining human corpses with large quantities of mold. Lucas Baker's experiment logs document Eveline turning 2 men into standard molded and 1 into a fat molded at will. Because they're created from corpses, molded cannot replicate higher brain functions, but something of the absorbed remains, cataloged somewhere in the fungal network. Jack Baker's consciousness appeared to Ethan while trapped in the mold, begging him to free the family by killing Eveline. The absorbed retain awareness inside the network. Whether that awareness constitutes immortality or eternal imprisonment, nobody knows. Every victim consumed by the mold for over a millennium might still be conscious, catalog preserved in fungal tissue that never dies. But if consciousness trapped in a hive mind forever seems like the ultimate horror, wait until you meet the girl who stayed aware through 31 years of experiments that should have killed her in minutes. Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor survived 31 years of continuous viral experiments that killed every other test subject in under a week. And the diary she left behind proves she stayed conscious enough to remember her mother through every single mutation. Umbrella kidnapped 14-year-old Lisa and her mother Jessica on November 10, 1967. Both were injected with progenitor virus strains immediately. Jessica received type A, which failed and killed her within days. Lisa received type B, which fused successfully with her cellular structure. Her diary from November 14, 1967 reads, in careful handwriting, I feel dizzy after that shot they gave. I don't see mom. When a female researcher impersonated Jessica on November 15th to keep Lisa calm during testing, Lisa saw through the deception instantly. She believed the woman had stolen her mother's face and tore it off in violent rage. But then Umbrella decided Lisa's usefulness hadn't ended. From 1967 to 1998, researchers injected her with every strain of T virus developed over 3 decades. Her body absorbed and integrated each one with 0 outward changes. In July 1988, the NE alpha parasite was implanted. Previous test subjects died within 5 minutes. Lisa's immune system absorbed it completely, developing tentacles from her back. The constant viral recombination created something entirely new in her blood, the G virus. William Birkin extracted it, declared her useless, and ordered her execution. 3 days after USS operatives shot her and monitored for life signs, they declared her dead and disposed of the body. Her regenerative abilities allowed complete recovery. She lived wild in the Arklay Mountains as what locals called the Mountain Woman. Her final diary entry, written in deteriorating handwriting after decades of mutation, shows complete cognitive collapse. Mommy, where I miss you. I just want to be with her. Over 30 years, Lisa collected faces from victims, primarily female researchers. She sewed them together into a grotesque mask worn over her own face. She believed wearing the faces would help her find her mother. During the 1998 Mansion incident, when STARS members opened Jessica's stone coffin, Lisa recognized her mother's remains by scent after 31 years. She cried out, "Mo, there," proving consciousness had persisted through 3 decades of torture Umbrella called research. She took her mother's skull and jumped into the abyss beneath the crypt. She survived the fall, encountered Albert Wesker during the Mansion's self-destruct sequence, and stalked him as one of her torturers. Wesker pinned her with a fallen chandelier. She finally died when Spencer Mansion exploded on July 25, 1998. Every other organism on this list represents transformation. Lisa Trevor represents duration. 31 years of conscious suffering in a body that refused to let her die.
Every single satisfying in Resident Evil, every outbreak, every mutant, every city reduced to ash traces back to one man, not a monster, not a tyrant. An old man in a wheelchair who decided that humanity wasn't good enough. Today I'm breaking down every hidden backstory in the entire Resident Evil franchise and everything we know about them. Starting with the guy who built the machine that turned everyone else into monsters, Oswell E. Spencer. Resident Evil's greatest villain never mutated on screen. Let that sink in. While every other antagonist in this franchise eventually transforms into some grotesque final boss, Spencer just sat there pulling strings, convinced he was God's architect. And honestly, his actual plan was worse than anything a mutant could do. Here's the thing. Spencer didn't stumble onto the progenitor virus by accident. In the late 1960s, he funded an expedition into West Africa specifically hunting for it. And when he established Umbrella's first research facilities in 1968, selling bioweapons was never the end game. That was just the revenue stream. His real goal was forced evolution. Unleash his viruses on the entire human population, let most of them die, then rule over whatever survivors crawled out as their creator. He literally wanted to architect a new species with himself on top, forever. To get there, he authorized experiments on children, prisoners, entire villages. Not as unfortunate side effects, but as deliberate steps toward his vision of perfected humanity. But here's where the irony gets thick. Spencer, the man who spent decades trying to force humanity to evolve, ended up old, frail and confined to a wheelchair. Wesker shoved his hand straight through Spencer's chest in his own estate. The guy who wanted to be a god couldn't even keep himself standing, and Spencer's influence didn't die with him. Not even close, because the connections he built, the ideologies he planted, they spread like a virus of their own. The connections. Here's the thing about Umbrella. Everyone treats them like the final boss. The big evil corporation pulling every string, running every experiment, poisoning every city. And for a while that tracks. But then you start digging into the connections, and you realize something genuinely unsettling. Umbrella's downfall didn't end anything. It just created a power vacuum. And the connections walked right into it. The connections were a criminal organization that swooped in after Umbrella's bankruptcy and seized its assets. Not some scrappy startup. A fully operational syndicate that absorbed Umbrella's research, its networks, and its supply chains like a parasite latching onto a fresh corpse. And their ideology? They didn't have one. Zero. No grand vision of human transcendence, no delusional god complex, just money. Pure, nihilistic greed wearing a very expensive suit. They took everything Umbrella built and kept the machine running. All that effort to bring Umbrella down, all those sacrifices and the connections just picked up where they left off. They coordinated bioweapon proliferation across the global black market like it was a stock portfolio. As long as bioweapons kept changing hands, the connections kept profiting. And this is where it gets really dark. Destroying Umbrella accomplished nothing. The heroes dismantled the corporation, celebrated the victory, and the underlying market for bioweapons kept humming along like nothing happened. The demand was permanent. The supply chain was permanent. Umbrella was just one storefront, and the new owners had already moved in. Their operational security was so airtight that no confirmed leaders, no headquarters, no faces. Just money flowing in the right directions and bodies piling up in the wrong ones. That's the real horror of Resident Evil. Not a monster in a lab. A spreadsheet in a boardroom. But if faceless corporate greed sounds bad, wait until you meet the guy who turned military loyalty into a personal bioweapon empire, Sergei Vladimir. Here's the thing about Umbrella's downfall. Everyone loves to blame the scientists, the corporate executives, the guys in lab coats making monsters in basements, but nobody talks about the men in uniform who saw those monsters and thought, I could use that. Sergei Vladimir was a former Soviet military officer who climbed the ranks inside Umbrella itself. Not a scientist, not a pencil-pushing executive. A soldier who founded the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service and used his paramilitary authority to become one of the corporation's most powerful loyalists, because Vladimir recognized something most people in his position pretended not to see. Bioweapon technology wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a shortcut to power that no amount of metals could ever match. So he started leveraging. After Umbrella's public collapse, Vladimir took the corporation's remaining assets and ran black market bioweapon operations out of Russia around 2003. TALOS combat data, experimental strains, materials that could level cities. He maintained entire shadow networks while positioning himself as the last true guardian of Umbrella's legacy. He wasn't breaking the system. He was the system, just redirecting it for himself. And that's the part that should genuinely bother you. Vladimir's story doesn't just expose one corrupt officer. It proves that the institutions supposedly controlling bioweapon proliferation are themselves the threat. Umbrella's own paramilitary leadership enforced containment protocols with one hand and sold the products with the other. Governments weren't victims of bioweapon leaks. They were customers. Vladimir eventually got consumed by the very biological forces he tried to weaponize, which is, not ideal. But every single character who tries to harness something they can't control ends up becoming the thing they wanted to control. Everyone. But at least Vladimir only destroyed himself. The next family on our list managed to turn genetic obsession into a multi-generational nightmare that makes his ambitions look almost quaint. The Ashford family. Most families have skeletons in the closet. The Ashfords had an entire genetic research program in theirs. Alfred and Alexia Ashford weren't just wealthy heirs to a bioweapon dynasty. They operated under a genuine, fully committed delusion that their bloodline represented a proto-species, a superior genetic lineage destined to inherit the Earth after regular humanity inevitably wiped itself out. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. They believed they were the next step in human evolution, and they had the money and the facilities to act on it. Here's where it gets dark, and I mean really dark. Alexia voluntarily injected herself with the T. Veronica virus at approximately age 17. Then she entered cryogenic sleep for 15 years to let the virus slowly fuse with her body. Let that sink in. A teenager decided on her own to turn herself into a bioweapon and take a decade-and-a-half nap to make it work. That's not science. That's a 17-year-old with a god complex and zero adult supervision, which is somehow worse than it sounds. And the family dysfunction didn't stop there. Alfred and Alexia were actually created as test tube experiments by their father Alexander, engineered from the DNA of their ancestor Veronica Ashford in pursuit of genetic perfection. The entire family structure was warped beyond recognition by their father's obsession with hereditary superiority. Alfred, left behind while his sister slept in a freezer, became profoundly psychologically damaged. He couldn't function independently. He developed a split personality, dressing as Alexia and speaking in her voice, violently lashing out at anyone who threatened the twisted fantasy he'd built around her eventual return. This is what happens when corporate greed puts on a family mask. When wealth meets, ideology meets zero accountability. The Ashfords didn't just fund bioweapon research. They became the research. They turned their own children into experiments and called it destiny. But if the Ashfords represent genetic aristocracy eating itself alive, the next name on this list took that same obsession with transcendence and made it somehow even more unhinged. Alex Wesker. Here's the thing about destroying Umbrella. Everyone celebrated. The corporation responsible for Raccoon City, for the T-Virus, for decades of human experimentation, was finally gone, dismantled, finished, and it changed absolutely nothing. Alex Wesker is the proof. She shares a genetic connection to Albert Wesker, and whether that link is familial or engineered through one of Spencer's projects, the result is identical. She inherited the same obsession with transcendence, the same conviction that humanity in its current form is a rough draft waiting to be edited. Umbrella didn't teach her this. She breathes it, and that's what makes her terrifying. Not her intelligence, not her resources, not even the bioweapons she developed. It's the fact that she exists at all. Umbrella is dust. Spencer is dead. Albert is dead. The infrastructure is gone, but the gospel survived. The idea that catastrophic biological transformation is an acceptable price for evolution, that human suffering is just collateral on the road to something greater, that idea didn't die with the company. It just found a new host. Alex actively pursued dangerous parasitic organisms specifically because they were unpredictable. She didn't want controlled results. She wanted chaos with potential. If a parasite could rewrite human biology in ways nobody could anticipate, that wasn't a flaw in her research. That was the point. Predictable science builds medicine. Unpredictable science builds gods. At least that's what she believed. And this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. You can shut down every lab, arrest every executive, burn every facility to the ground, but you cannot destroy an ideology by destroying a company. Someone will always pick up the torch. Spencer's philosophy became a virus of its own, one that doesn't need a corporate structure to spread. It just needs one person who believes in it badly enough. Alex Wesker was that person, which is, not ideal. But if Alex carried Spencer's philosophy forward willingly, the next name on this list had no such choice. William Birkin didn't inherit an ideology. He got crushed by one. William Birkin. Here's the thing about William Birkin. Every other name on this list either started corrupt or was born into corruption. Birkin didn't. He was a genuine scientist with genuine ambitions. And for roughly 15 years, Umbrella slowly filed those ambitions down into something unrecognizable. He created the G-Virus, not the T-Virus, not some derivative, but a completely new parasitic bioweapon that made everything Umbrella had developed look like a rough draft. It didn't just infect, it evolved. It rewrote its host on a biological level the T-Virus couldn't even approach. This was the next step in bioweapon development, and Birkin knew exactly what that meant. Because when Umbrella's security force came knocking to seize his research, Birkin did something that still stands as the single most desperate act in the entire franchise. He injected himself with the G-Virus. See, Birkin had been planning to sell the G-Virus to the US government, cutting Umbrella out entirely. So Umbrella sent their USS team to take it back by force. And before you frame what happened next as some noble sacrifice, let me be clear. It wasn't. This was a terrified man who saw no remaining option except becoming the thing nobody could control. The logic is horrifying precisely because it makes sense. But here's where it gets devastating. His mutated G-form didn't lose William Birkin entirely. Fragments of his consciousness survived inside the monster, broken pieces of a father's mind rattling around inside something that could tear through concrete, and those fragments locked onto one target, his daughter, Sherry. The creature pursued her relentlessly. Driven by shattered instinct it couldn't understand or override, a father trying to reach his child through a body that could only traumatize her. He couldn't stop it. He couldn't communicate. He could only chase the person he loved most while wearing the shape of her worst nightmare. That's not a villain's backstory. That's a tragedy with teeth. And if Birkin's story feels like the franchise finally making things personal, wait until you meet the woman who built an entire religion around her grief, Mother Miranda. Most cult leaders are just charismatic liars. Mother Miranda is something worse. She's a charismatic liar who might actually believe every word she's saying. Here's the setup. At some point, Miranda discovered a parasitic organism called the mold, a fungal network capable of infiltrating and rewriting human biology from the inside out. Exposure to the mold granted her abilities that, to an uneducated rural population, would look indistinguishable from miracles, healing, longevity, control over the environment. She didn't just stumble into power. She staged it, carefully, deliberately. Every supernatural display, every act of divine intervention, was a calculated performance designed to position herself as the spiritual authority over an entire village. And it worked, for decades. We're not talking about a few years of cult nonsense. Generational succession occurred under her rule. People were born, lived their entire lives, and died without ever knowing a world outside Miranda's authority. That's not leadership, that's ownership. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Miranda's actual goal was never spiritual salvation. It was biological conversion. She was systematically infecting the village population with the mold, turning living human beings into host vessels for a parasitic organism, while framing the entire process as transcendence, as evolution, as being chosen. The villagers didn't resist because they didn't know they were being consumed. They thought they were being saved. And the question nobody can answer definitively is whether Miranda herself still knows the difference. She is simultaneously the mold's host and its instrument. Her apparent humanity, her ability to speak and plan and manipulate, is maintained only through hierarchical control over the very parasite eating her alive. Remove that control structure and there's no telling what's left underneath. Her will and the mold's will have been entangled for so long that separating them might be impossible. She didn't just use religion as a weapon. She became the religion, and the congregation never had a chance. But if a parasitic cult leader sounds bad, wait until you hear about the architect who tried to do the right thing and got buried alive in his own building for it. George Trevor. George Trevor did everything right, and it killed him. Here's the setup. In the late 1960s, Umbrella hires Trevor, a skilled architect, to design what he's told is a cutting-edge research facility. A mansion, laboratories beneath it, complex structural work requiring someone who genuinely understood containment systems and underground construction. Trevor took the job because it was a job. He had zero idea what the facility was actually for. The mansion was completed around 1967, and Trevor moved on with his life. But then Umbrella invited him back. A return visit, maybe additional consultation, maybe a friendly gesture from a generous client, except it wasn't friendly at all. It was a trap. George Trevor knew too much. He designed every corridor, every hidden passage, every structural secret of that facility. An Umbrella couldn't have a loose end like that walking around with a full set of blueprints in his head, so they locked him inside. The man who designed every room of that building was imprisoned within it and left to die, not executed, not given some quick ending, left to wander the halls of his own creation, slowly starving, trapped in the very architecture he'd built. His own blueprints became his prison walls. And here's the thing that makes it truly cruel. Trevor tried to use his knowledge of the layout to escape. He designed the place. He knew every trick, every hidden room. It didn't matter. Umbrella had modified the building after his original work. The mansion he remembered and the mansion he was trapped in were no longer the same structure. His expertise was worthless. When players eventually discover his skeletal remains, they're finding a man who possessed architectural brilliance, intimate knowledge of every inch of his prison, and absolutely zero chance of escape. He built the cage, got lured back into it, and nobody ever came looking. Which is, not ideal. Trevor's story is the moment Resident Evil quietly tells you something the heroes never want to admit. Individual competence does not defeat institutional ruthlessness. You can be brilliant, you can know every secret, and the system will swallow you whole without even pausing to chew. But if George Trevor's fate feels like the cruelest thing Umbrella ever engineered, wait until you meet something that makes corporate evil look almost quaint by comparison. Eveline. They didn't just build a weapon, they built a child. Eveline was designated an E-Series bioweapon, a parasitic organism engineered from the ground up with artificial consciousness, genuine emotional development, and the psychology of a little girl, not simulated emotions, not behavioral programming designed to mimic distress. The researchers who created her deliberately gave her the capacity to feel loneliness, abandonment, love, and fear. They made her real enough to suffer, and then they made her dangerous for suffering. Here's the thing most people miss about Eveline. She didn't choose to destroy the Baker family. Her parasitic abilities activated automatically in response to emotional distress. When she felt abandoned, when she felt unloved, her biology reached out and started rewriting the nervous systems of everyone around her. She wasn't making a decision. She was having a panic attack, and her panic attacks happened to turn people into molded. Think about that for a second. Imagine giving a child the ability to accidentally lobotomize anyone within 100 feet of her every time she cried, and then abandoning her. The Baker family is the part that breaks you. Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, Zoe. They were a normal family in rural Louisiana before Eveline arrived, and when she latched onto them, she wasn't trying to hurt them. She was trying to make them love her. She wanted a mom. She wanted a dad. She wanted to sit at the dinner table and belong somewhere. But her biology couldn't build a family without destroying one first. Every bond she formed with the Bakers corroded their neurological foundation. The harder she held on, the less of them remained. She is simultaneously the most dangerous bioweapon in the entire franchise and its most victimized creation. The people who engineered her knew exactly what they were doing. They designed a weapon that would infiltrate communities through emotional attachment, and to make that work, they had to give it a genuine need for emotional attachment. They created a child specifically so she could be weaponized by her own loneliness. That's not a villain, that's an indictment. But if Eveline's story feels like the darkest thing bioweapon development could produce, there's someone in the village who proves that parasitic infection doesn't need a child's face to be devastating. Donna Beneviento. Most of the lords in village are loud about what they are. Heisenberg won't shut up. Dimitrescu is 8 feet of but Donna Beneviento barely speaks, barely moves, and that's exactly what makes her the most unsettling one in the entire lineup. Here's her story. Before the mold ever touched her, Donna was already broken. Documents scattered through her estate paint a picture of a woman defined by isolation, anxiety, and loss. She lost her parents young. She struggled to connect with people at all. The dolls weren't a hobby. They were her only relationships. She poured everything into crafting them because they were the one thing she could control. Then Mother Miranda infected her with the Kadu parasite, and something genuinely horrible happened. It worked. Not in the way infection usually works in this franchise, where people mutate and lose themselves violently. Donna's integration was quiet, seamless. The parasite bonded with her so thoroughly that separating her own thoughts from the mold's influence became functionally impossible. And here's where it gets really dark. The mold gave Donna something she never had: purpose, belonging, a role within Miranda's family. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She had a mother figure. She had siblings, even if those siblings were monsters. The parasite didn't destroy her identity, it filled the gaps in, which is, textbook cult indoctrination, except the cult leader is a centuries-old parasite queen, and the indoctrination is literally biological. Her ability to project hallucinations comes from the mold working through her psychological framework. The dolls become vessels for parasitic influence. Angie, her primary doll, functions as her voice because Donna herself can barely speak. She built a puppet to say the things she couldn't, and then a parasite crawled inside both of them. The worst part is this: you can't save Donna Beneviento, not because she's too far gone, but because she doesn't experience herself as someone who needs saving. The mold healed her loneliness. Killing her isn't a rescue mission. It's destroying the only version of her that ever felt whole. Whether that constitutes salvation or murder is a question the game never answered, and honestly, it shouldn't. But if Donna's tragedy is quiet and internal, the next one is loud, violent, and hits like a truck to the chest. Jack Baker. Jack Baker might be the most relatable monster Resident Evil has ever created, and that's exactly what makes him the hardest to stomach. Before the mold, before Eveline, before any of it, Jack was just a guy. A family man living in rural Louisiana, running a guest house, raising his kids. He loved his family, genuinely loved. And then a little girl showed up, and everything he was started to rot from the inside out. Here's the thing that separates Jack from almost every other infected character in the franchise. His transformation wasn't instant. Jack was exposed to Eveline approximately 3 years before the events of Resident Evil 7, and the mold took him apart slowly, piece by piece, day by day. He could feel the aggression building, the impulses getting loud, the moments of clarity getting shorter, and he couldn't stop any of it. That's not a monster story. That's a hostage situation happening inside one man's brain. What makes it worse is that his emotional bonds didn't disappear. They just got weaponized. Jack still wanted his family together, but the mold twisted those attachments into mechanisms of control and violence. Love became possession. Protection became imprisonment. The dinner table became a torture chamber. The home that was supposed to be the safest place in the world became the most dangerous one. And then there's Eveline. Jack became her adoptive father figure and her parasitic servant simultaneously. At a certain point, you genuinely cannot tell where the familial instinct ends and the biological exploitation begins. They're the same thing, which is, not ideal. The developers weren't being subtle here. Jack Baker is parasitic infection as a metaphor for domestic violence. A man who loved his family, watching his own hands do terrible things to them, trapped behind eyes that can still see everything but control nothing. The house didn't change, but every room became a place where something awful could happen, because the person who was supposed to make it safe was now the source of the danger. 3 years, not 3 minutes, not 3 days. 3 years of watching yourself become the thing destroying the people you love most. But if Jack's story is about a man losing himself over years, wait until you hear about a woman who lost herself over decades and never stopped screaming the entire time. Lisa Trevor. Every backstory we've covered so far has one thing in common. Someone made a choice. Spencer chose power. Birkin chose desperation. Jack Baker was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Lisa Trevor chose nothing. She was simply taken. Before Umbrella got their hands on her, Lisa was a young girl. That's it. That's the whole biography. She wasn't a scientist, wasn't military, wasn't connected to any conspiracy. She was just a person. And in 1967, Umbrella imprisoned her and began what would become decades of uninterrupted experimental infection. They hit her with the progenitor virus, then the T-virus, then whatever experimental agents they had lying around that week. Every new pathogen Umbrella cooked up, they pumped into Lisa Trevor because she was already there and she was already surviving. That was the entire scientific rationale. She lived through the last round, so she'd make a convenient subject for the next one. Here's where it stops being a horror game and starts being something worse. She was conscious the entire time. Decades of progressive transformation, her body twisting into something less recognizable with every new injection. And Lisa Trevor was aware of all of it. She could feel herself becoming a monster. She could feel her ability to communicate slipping away, and she couldn't do a single thing about it because the people observing her didn't see a person anymore. They saw a test subject that kept producing interesting data. The worst part isn't the experiments, it's her behavior. Even after years of infection, after her body had been warped beyond recognition, Lisa still tried to escape, still tried to reach people, still displayed every sign of a conscious mind, desperate for basic human connection, and every single person who encountered her saw a creature. Nobody looked at Lisa Trevor and thought, that's someone's daughter. Umbrella didn't keep her alive for a breakthrough. She survived the first round of infection, and that made her convenient. That's the whole story. A human life reduced to raw material because the paperwork was already filed and the cell was already occupied, and that's what Resident Evil is actually about. Not zombies, not corporations, not viruses. It's about what happens when institutions decide that a human being is just a resource to be used until there's nothing left. Every monster in this franchise was made by someone. Every single one. The horror was never the creatures. It was always the people who created them. Lisa Trevor's death wasn't a boss fight. It was mercy. And the fact that dying was the best thing that ever happened to her tells you everything you need to know about the world Umbrella. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. Trevor's death wasn't a boss fight. It was mercy. And the fact that dying was the best thing that ever happened to her tells you everything you need to know about the world Umbrella. Resident Evil has been terrorizing players for 28 years with moments that still haunt gamers decades later. Every jump scare, every stalker enemy, every body horror transformation has contributed to a franchise that defined what it means to be truly scared while holding a controller. Some moments made you flinch, others made you pause the game and walk away, and a few literally changed how horror games are designed forever. That's why today, I'm ranking the 12 most terrifying moments in Resident Evil history, from unsettling to absolutely traumatizing, starting with the moment that launched survival horror itself. The first zombie. The first zombie encounter in Resident Evil isn't just iconic, and after nearly 3 decades, it remains the template every horror game copies when introducing players to their nightmare. The scene unfolds in the Spencer Mansion's East Wing corridor. STARS member Kenneth Sullivan lies face down in a pool of blood. Players approach cautiously. A shambling figure crouches over the corpse, completely still. Then it moves. The zombie slowly turns its head, revealing a decomposing face mid-meal. White eyes lock onto the player in a lifeless stare. Blood drips from its mouth. WatchMojo ranked this as their #1 Resident Evil scare, calling it the iconic moment that started it all. But here's what makes this encounter devastatingly effective beyond the obvious gore. No music cue announces the danger. The fixed camera angle forces players to walk toward the threat rather than away from it. At this point in the game, you have 0 frame of reference for what these creatures can do. The zombie doesn't lunge immediately. It rises slowly. That deliberate pacing gives players time to process exactly what they're seeing before being forced to react. And you're doing it with limited ammunition, no knowledge of how many bullets zombies take, and no idea if more are coming. Director Shinji Mikami designed this reveal to establish the mansion's fundamental rule. Nowhere is safe. Death lurks in every shadow. Every corpse might not be a corpse. The encounter's legacy extends far beyond Resident Evil itself. It established the template for first monster reveals across the entire horror gaming industry. Thousands of games have copied this exact structure. Show the aftermath first, let the player get close, then reveal the threat with agonizing slowness. The formula works because anticipation creates more fear than shock. But if one slow-moving zombie in a mansion corridor seems manageable, wait until you see what happens when Umbrella's experiments evolve beyond basic reanimation. The Bandersnatch. The Bandersnatch ambush in Code Veronica isn't just a jump scare. And decades later, players still remember the exact moment they realized Alfred Ashford's trap was more sadistic than they could have imagined. The setup feels straightforward enough. Claire Redfield gets trapped in a corridor when security shutters slam shut. Alfred taunts her over the intercom, his voice dripping with theatrical malice. A heavy door opens with an agonizingly slow animation. A heartbeat sound effect pulses. Claire enters what appears to be an empty room containing only unmanned machine guns mounted on tripods. Valuable weapons just sitting there? Players move forward to collect them. Then a Bandersnatch attacks without warning, but the creature's design exploits something deeper than surprise. The Bandersnatch is a failed tyrant experiment with sickly pale skin and one grotesquely elongated arm. That single functional arm stretches across impossible distances. Players who think they've maintained safe spacing discover the creature can grab them from 10 feet away. The combat creates an impossible choice. Effective weapons like explosive-tipped arrows are resources you desperately want to save for later tyrant encounters, but fighting this thing with standard ammunition means enduring a battle that drags on while that arm keeps reaching. And if it grabs you, the Bandersnatch delivers a one-hit, neck-snap kill animation. The real horror lies in the psychological setup. Alfred explicitly tells you a trap is coming. You know danger is ahead, but the empty room subverts every expectation. You expect an ambush. You find nothing. You relax. That's exactly when the attack triggers. This false safety technique became a horror game staple, but few games execute it with such calculated cruelty. The slow door animation builds dread. The heartbeat sound effect primes anxiety. The machine guns promise reward. Every element conspires to make you believe the trap already failed or never existed. The Bandersnatch's appearance feels like punishment for trusting the game's own setup. Players describe the encounter as genuinely shocking even when replaying the game. The elongated arm remains visually disturbing. The instant death grab animation never stops being brutal. And Alfred's mocking laughter afterward adds insult to literal injury. But if Alfred's sadistic games seem cruel, wait until you experience a puzzle where solving it it correctly still means watching someone burn alive. Happy birthday. The happy birthday tape in Resident Evil 7 isn't just disturbing. And unlike every other puzzle in the franchise, solving it perfectly still forces you to watch a man die screaming. Lucas Baker's Death Trap represents the series' darkest foray into Saw-style psychological horror. Players control Clancy, a cameraman who documented the Baker family before their infection. He wakes up in a locked attic room. An animatronic clown sits at a table holding a lit birthday candle. The objective seems simple enough. Light the candle and place it on a cake. Motion-activated sprinklers extinguish every attempt. The puzzle requires finding items scattered around the room to bypass the sprinklers. But then you realize what Lucas actually designed. The solution requires increasingly degrading actions. You must reach into a disgusting toilet filled with filth to retrieve a telescope. You spill oil across the floor while retrieving a winding key from a dummy's stomach. A balloon trap pierces Clancy's body with a quill pen, and he screams in pain. The combination lock uses disturbing symbols: a child swinging, a crow on a bell, a fetus. Throughout the entire ordeal, Lucas watches via security camera, commenting gleefully on Clancy's suffering like he's providing director's commentary on his own torture film. Every action feels violating. The toilet reach makes players physically recoil. The oil spill seems like a puzzle mistake until you realize it's deliberate. The quill pen attack punishes you for trying to progress. One player described it as delivering one of the most dreadful feelings they'd ever experienced in Resident Evil. Here's the part that breaks you. Even after solving every puzzle correctly, the game does not permit Clancy to survive. When the candle finally reaches the cake, it detonates. The flames ignite the spilled oil. You watch helplessly in first-person perspective as Clancy burns alive, screaming and trying to extinguish himself. The VHS tape ends with his death. Later, Ethan must solve the same puzzle with knowledge gained from watching a man die. And when you enter that room, you discover Clancy's charred corpse still sitting where he burned. The achievement for completing the puzzle is literally called Out of the Frying Pan. Lucas designed a puzzle where victory equals death. There's no way to save Clancy, no alternative solution, just inevitable immolation. But if psychological torture through puzzle solving seems horrific, wait until you see what happens when a southern grandmother mutates into something that defies human biology entirely. Marguerite's transformation. Marguerite Baker's boss fight in Resident Evil 7 isn't just body horror, and after 2 encounters with her controlling insect swarms, nothing prepares you for what she becomes in that greenhouse. The setup establishes her as dangerous but human. Marguerite patrols the old house with a lantern that commands wasps and flies. She mumbles about unwanted guests and her family. Her movements are jittery and unnatural, but recognizably human. The first encounter in the main house shows her crawling through walls. Creepy, sure, but still within the bounds of mold-infected mutation. The greenhouse confrontation seems like it'll follow the same pattern. Shoot her enough times, she retreats, you progress, but then she transforms into something that shouldn't exist in nature. Her limbs elongate grotesquely, joints bending at impossible angles. She scrambles up walls and across ceilings like a humanoid spider, defying gravity entirely. Her voice drops to a deep, demonic register that sounds nothing like human vocal cords should produce. Most disturbingly, an insect hive erupts from her abdomen. Players describe it as hornet's nest underwear. The hive constantly spawns stinging creatures that swarm around her and attack independently. The greenhouse's multi-level layout transforms into a nightmare arena. Marguerite attacks from gaps in ceilings, bursts through windows without warning, and emerges from cracks in walls you didn't know existed. Her ability to traverse any surface means no vantage point provides safety. Standing on upper walkways just puts you at face level when she crawls across the ceiling. Hiding on the ground floor means she drops down from above. Fire weapons offer the best damage against the exposed abdomen hive, but limited fuel forces you into close quarters, and when you're that close, the insect swarm becomes overwhelming. You must target her hive or head while she shrieks and moans in voices that sound barely human. The audio assault matches the visual horror. Developer interviews reveal Marguerite was designed to represent pure creature feature body horror within RE7's framework. Jack embodies slasher films. Lucas represents psychological torture. Marguerite channels the grotesque transformation horror of films like The Fly. Her design references David Cronenberg's body horror aesthetic. The DLC adds another nightmare layer. In the bedroom segment, if Marguerite catches you, she sprouts a centipede from her mouth and devours your face. That single animation cements her as one of the franchise's most viscerally upsetting creations. Her transformation from jittery southern grandmother to eldritch insect queen represents Resident Evil at its most physically revolting. But if watching a human become a spider seems impossible to top, wait until you learn about the zombie variant that fundamentally broke survival horror's safety rules. Crimson Heads. The Crimson Head mechanic in the Resident Evil remake isn't just a new enemy type, and after the original game trained players that dead zombies stay dead, this system fundamentally altered what survival horror could be. The first mandatory encounter occurs in the mirror corridor on Spencer Mansion's second floor. Players pass through this hallway multiple times collecting items and solving puzzles. An immovable corpse lies in the center of the corridor. You walk past it, nothing happened. You walk past it again, still nothing. The game conditions you to accept this corpse as environmental decoration, safe, inert, part of the scenery, but then you return with the dog collar needed for the armor room puzzle. The corpse suddenly rises with red-tinged skin, glowing crimson eyes, and elongated claws like twisted knives. Most terrifyingly, it sprints, not shambles, not stumbles. It runs at full speed directly at you. One Steam user wrote that the first Crimson Head stood up as they were walking past and it gave them chest pains. Another described shooting a Crimson Head's head clean off with a shotgun, only to have the headless corpse reanimate and grab them anyway. The mechanic's brilliance lies in its systemic horror. Every zombie you kill now presents a choice. Burn the corpse with limited kerosene. You only have approximately 15 uses total for the entire game. Decapitate zombies with critical shotgun headshots. But critical hits are random chance and shotgun shells are precious. Or avoid killing zombies entirely. But that means navigating hallways filled with active threats. Creature designer Masaki Yamanaka explained that traditional zombies were getting old, so their revival as stronger and faster Crimson Head zombies added fresh kinds of terror and gameplay elements. The system transformed resource management from tactical consideration into constant anxiety. Every cleared area becomes potentially dangerous again. Every corpse becomes a ticking time bomb. The remake also weaponizes nostalgia against veterans. The infamous dog hallway from the original occurs in the West Wing first floor corridor, but Capcom delayed the scare. In the first passage, the glass merely cracks. Players who know the original moment relax, thinking they avoided it. Then on the return trip, dogs burst through from the opposite direction. The developers knew exactly what veterans expected and punished them for that knowledge. The Crimson Head system proved that horror games could maintain tension even in familiar areas. No space stays safe. No victory stays permanent. Every action creates future consequences. But if zombies that refuse to stay dead seem terrifying, wait until you meet the patriarch who makes zombies look fragile by comparison. Jack Baker. Jack Baker smashing through a wall in Resident Evil 7 isn't just a shocking moment, and after the dinner scene establishes him as dangerous, nothing prepares you for the sheer, unstoppable force he becomes. The setup pays explicit homage to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Ethan Winters wakes up tied to a chair at the Baker family dinner table. Jack sits at the head, carving a rotting animal carcass. Marguerite serves unidentifiable meat. Lucas sits across from Ethan with a smirk. The silent grandmother watches from her wheelchair. Jack insists Ethan eat. When Ethan refuses, Jack stabs Lucas's arm and rips it clean off. Lucas responds with, "God damn it, old man, not again," as though this is routine family behavior. But then Ethan escapes his restraints and runs. Jack's pursuit begins in the living room. Players sprint through the doorway, desperately searching for an exit or hiding spot. Without warning, Jack smashes through a solid wall to attack. Not a door, not a window, a wall. Screen Rant called it a Hall of Fame horror gaming moment because it establishes that nowhere is structurally safe from this man. Jack's design draws directly from Jack Nicholson's portrayal of Jack Torrance in The Shining, creating an archetypal slasher film killer who taunts victims while demonstrating supernatural resilience. Bullets barely slow him down. Headshots make him stumble for 2 seconds before he resumes pursuit. He wields shovels and axes with gleeful abandon, swinging them in wide arcs that force players into corners. If he catches Ethan, he demonstrates his contempt by twisting Ethan's arm until it snaps with a sickening crack, then breaking his neck while calling him pathetic. The first-person perspective makes every attack feel personally violating. You see Jack's hands reaching for your throat. You hear his breathing inches from your face. You feel trapped in Ethan's body as bones break. Producer Jun Takeuchi ordered late rewrites specifically because the original Baker behavior was overly normal. The final version perfectly balances Southern hospitality and homicidal mania. Jack offers food and family while simultaneously threatening to murder you. That cognitive dissonance creates psychological horror beyond the physical violence. Here's what breaks the entire game's reality. The subsequent revelation confirms that Jack actually killed Ethan in this sequence. Ethan died. The mold reanimated him as a revenant. Every moment after the dinner scene occurs, while controlling a walking corpse. That single detail recontextualizes the entire campaign. But if one unkillable man hunting you through a house seems relentless, wait until you meet the bioweapon specifically designed to never stop hunting STARS, members, Nemesis. Nemesis's introduction in Resident Evil 3 isn't just a memorable entrance, and after 2 games of zombies that shuffle slowly, this bioweapon fundamentally redefined what relentless pursuit means in horror games. The scene occurs outside the Raccoon City Police Department. Jill Valentine encounters terrified STARS member Brad Vickers stumbling toward her. He's panicking, barely coherent. Quote 2, Brad gasps. Quote 3. Before Jill can respond, a massive figure appears behind Brad. Nemesis extends a tentacle and instantly impales Brad through the head. Brad dies screaming, his body going limp. Nemesis tosses the corpse aside like garbage. Then he turns to Jill and growls his iconic line in a deep, inhuman voice. Quote 4. But the terror doesn't end when the cutscene does. Producer Shinji Mikami wanted to introduce a new kind of fear into the game, a persistent feeling of paranoia. Drawing inspiration from the T-1000 in Terminator 2, Nemesis could pursue players through approximately 5 rooms. He followed through doors, a first for the series. He never permanently died until the finale. The constant threat transformed every action into risk calculation. Games Radar called him the deadliest villain in the history of survival horror. Nemesis's mechanics created constant uncertainty. He could appear anywhere within scripted encounter zones, but you never knew when. Defeating him temporarily yielded weapon upgrades like the Eagle parts for Jill's pistol, incentivizing risky combat. His arsenal evolved throughout the game. Physical attacks escalated to rocket launchers, then flamethrowers. After enough damage, his coat burned away, revealing grotesque tentacle mutations underneath. Players describe bursting through a door with Nemesis directly behind them, like he'd be touching you if you'd been even a millisecond slower. The only guaranteed safety was save rooms, but even there, his distant growl sometimes echoed through walls, reminding players that rest was temporary. Here's what made him truly unstoppable. Nemesis possessed actual AI-driven pursuit, not just scripted appearances. He tracked players across multiple rooms simultaneously. If you entered the boutique on Raccoon City's main street, he could follow you inside, smash through the back room, and continue pursuit into the alley. No other RE enemy before him had demonstrated that level of persistent hunting behavior. But if one bioweapon programmed to hunt STARS member seems nightmarish, wait until you see the creature that hunts by sound alone while clinging to ceilings above your head, the Licker. The Licker's introduction in Resident Evil 2 isn't just a jump scare, and after the game spends 10 minutes training you to watch windows for zombie dogs, it exploits that learned behavior to deliver one of gaming's most effective misdirections. The scene unfolds in the RPD's west corridor on the first floor. Players notice something dart past a window, a fraction of a second glimpse, just enough to register movement. Veterans of RE1 immediately start watching every window obsessively, expecting Cerberus dogs to crash through glass. The game knows this. The game counts on this, but the attack comes from above. Players advance to find a broken window, a disabled security shutter, and an RPD officer's headless corpse. Blood pools across the floor. Something drips into it from overhead with a wet plop. The player instinctively looks up. A CGI cutscene triggers, revealing a skinless humanoid creature clinging to the ceiling. Exposed musculature glistens. A visible pulsing brain protrudes from its skull. An impossibly long tongue hangs from its mouth. The Licker drops down with a meaty, wet sound that makes players physically recoil. At this stage of the game, You typically possess only a handgun with approximately 5 bullets. Lickers require multiple shotgun shells to kill effectively. They can climb walls and ceilings, meaning vertical space offers zero safety. Their tongue attack can instantly decapitate if it connects. Players describe the panic of unloading their entire pistol magazine while the licker barely flinches. The subtlety distinguishes this from cheaper horror. Rather than a loud audio sting, the reveal builds through environmental storytelling. The window movement establishes threat direction. The corpse confirms lethality. The dripping blood creates anticipation. Players feel the trap closing before it springs. That dread carries more weight than any jump scare could. Here's the mechanic that elevates it beyond a single encounter. Lickers hunt by sound. Walking slowly could avoid detection entirely, but combat noise attracted them from adjacent rooms. In the RE2 remake, this creates compounding terror with Mr. X. Fighting a licker makes noise that summons the tyrant. Fleeing from Mr. X by running might lead directly into licker ambushes. Every action feeds into escalating danger. The creature design itself exploits primal disgust. Skinless bodies trigger deep evolutionary revulsion. The exposed brain suggests vulnerability that the creature's actual durability contradicts. The tongue represents a weapon that violates personal space in ways bullets cannot. But if a creature that hunts by sound seems terrifying, wait until you meet the test subject who survived every virus Umbrella created and cannot be killed no matter how much ammunition you waste. Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor in the Resident Evil remake isn't just an unkillable enemy, and after 30 years of experiments that killed everyone else in under a week, she represents something Umbrella's scientists literally described as biologically impossible. The first encounter subverts survival horror's most sacred rule. Players enter a cabin in the Spencer Mansion courtyard. A typewriter sits on the desk, the universal Resident Evil symbol of safety. Save rooms are inviolable spaces where no enemy can reach you. Players relax, save their game, and collect the square crank needed for progression. Then Lisa attacks and knocks the player unconscious. The game violates its own safety contract, but Lisa's terror goes far deeper than breaking save room rules. Umbrella kidnapped Lisa Trevor and her mother Jessica in November 1967. Lisa was 14 years old. They needed test subjects for the progenitor virus. Most subjects died within 72 hours of infection. Lisa survived. Then they injected her with Type A virus. She survived. Type B virus. She survived. The experimental NE alpha parasite that drove every other host violently insane within minutes. Lisa retained enough consciousness to recognize her mother's face 30 years after their separation. Research files from September 1998 note that Lisa had zero cellular degradation despite prolonged viral exposure. That's not unusual. That's physically impossible. Viruses destroy cells. That's how they function. But Lisa's cells weren't just surviving viral infection. They were using the viral DNA to enhance themselves. Dr. William Birkin wrote in July 1988 that subject Lisa Trevor represents an evolutionary dead end that somehow became viable. His later notes reference mechanisms beyond our understanding, without ever explaining what those mechanisms actually are. Here's what makes her encounters nightmare fuel. In the underground catacombs, Lisa actively patrols. She hunts players through disorienting fixed camera tunnels filled with poisonous snakes. She cannot be killed at this point in the game. No amount of ammunition will stop her permanently. Shotgun blasts to the head make her stumble. She stands back up. Grenade launcher explosions knock her down. She rises again, moaning and rattling her chains. The face mask reveals her true horror. When Umbrella sent female staff disguised as her mother to pacify her, Lisa recognized the deception. She tore off their faces and stitched them together as a grotesque mask, believing she needed to return Mother's face to her. Her deteriorating diary entries chronicle cognitive decline through increasingly childish handwriting. Director Shinji Mikami stated he wanted people to feel guilty for attacking an innocent victim. The final confrontation occurs at an underground altar. Lisa opens her mother's coffin, recognizes Jessica's skull by scent alone, and screams in anguish before throwing herself into the abyss. Rock Paper Shotgun called her story the highlight of the game, a rare instance where understanding a monster's tragedy makes it more disturbing rather than less. But if one unkillable pursuer in a mansion seems oppressive, wait until you experience a stalker whose footsteps echo through an entire police station and never stop no matter where you hide. Mr. X. Mr. X's stalking system in the RS2 remake isn't just an improved enemy AI. And after the game gives you 2 hours to feel safe exploring the RPD station, his arrival transforms every corridor into a minefield of sound-based anxiety. His introduction establishes inhuman strength. The tyrant lifts helicopter wreckage like it's made of tinfoil, revealing his massive frame in a trench coat and fedora. Then he begins hunting. Unlike the 1998 original's scripted appearances in specific rooms, this Mr. X possesses sophisticated AI that tracks players regardless of room separation. Director Kazunori Kadoi confirmed that if you hear Tyrant's footsteps in the vicinity, you can definitely bet that he is actually in close proximity, but the sound design carries the real terror. Kadoi's team created the footsteps by recording different sounds and mixing them together to create a specific sound that would carry that level of impact someone of Tyrant's build would create. Those footsteps are deliberately imprecise, loud enough to cause constant anxiety, vague enough to prevent pinpointing his exact location. 3 distinct audio phases mirror emotional states. Distant footsteps create stress. Door opening sounds trigger paranoia. Metallic clanging means he's in the same room and you need to run immediately. Mr. X can hear gunshots, running footsteps, door slamming, and even zombie attack sounds. His audible detection radius spans 3 rooms. Fight zombies near the main hall, and he appears from the west corridor 30 seconds later. Slam a door while fleeing, and the sound draws him directly to your position. Players must move slowly, use knives instead of guns, and avoid all combat when possible. He cannot be killed during stalking segments. Shooting him causes temporary stagger. On hardcore difficulty, recovery is nearly instant. Players discovered through frame-by-frame analysis that he moves at 4 times walking speed when not visible on screen, slowing only when close enough that players might hear the difference. Reddit investigations confirmed no teleportation occurs. His presence is always real. He's actually walking those halls. The result transforms every action into risk calculation. Fighting zombies attracts Mr. X. Fleeing zombies by running also attracts Mr. X. Standing still while zombies approach means getting grabbed, which makes noise, which attracts Mr. X. Only designated safe rooms provide respite, and even there, players report anxiety hearing his footsteps pass by outside. One reviewer wrote that opening doors has never been this frightening, capturing how the remake weaponized basic navigation against players. Every door could reveal the tyrant standing on the other side. Every corner could hide him waiting in ambush. Every puzzle requires listening for footsteps while vulnerable with inventory open. But if relentless stalking through a police station seems nightmarish, wait until you experience the jump scare that literally defined what video game horror could achieve: the dogs. The dogs crashing through the window in Resident Evil isn't just a famous jump scare, and after nearly 30 years of horror games copying this exact moment, it remains the single most influential terror sequence in video game history. The scene occurs in Spencer Mansion's first floor L-shaped corridor. Players traverse a hallway lined with windows. Background music drops to near silence. The fixed camera positions the player character at the far edge of the screen, walking away from the camera. Nothing suggests danger. The hallway appears to be a simple transition space between rooms. Then, without warning, a zombie dog explodes through a window inches from the camera. The creature appears enormous and immediate, filling the screen. Before players can process the first attack, a second dog crashes through another window, but the design brilliance goes far deeper than simple shock value. Academic research cites this as a classic game startle effect that influenced the entire horror gaming industry. IGN ranked it among gaming's most terrifying moments across all media. The cinematic composition exploits psychological vulnerabilities. Placing the character distant from the camera makes the dog's proximity to the viewer feel like a personal attack. The window-lined corridor trained players subconsciously to consider it a transition space rather than a danger zone. Players walk through hallways constantly in games. This hallway looks identical to every other safe hallway. The double dog assault prevents recovery between shocks. The first dog triggers a panic response. The second dog hits while players are still reacting to the first, compounding the terror. Destructoid wrote an entire article about this moment, calling it one of gaming's defining scares that set the standard for video game horror. Player testimonials spanning 3 decades confirm its lasting impact. One wrote that the jump scare probably took a good 5 years off their life and was a revelation that nowhere in the Spencer mansion was truly safe. Another admitted they were so freaked out when the dogs came bursting through the window that they instantly turned the game off and never played it again. Forums from 1996 through 2024 contain variations of that dog scene, mentioned with reverence and residual fear. The 2002 remake weaponizes this legacy with surgical precision. Glass merely cracks on the first passage. Players who know the original moment tense up. Nothing happens. They relax, thinking they avoided it or that Capcom removed it. Then on the return trip, dogs attack from the opposite direction. The developers knew exactly what veterans expected and punished them for anticipating the original timing and location. The moment established that horror games could deliver cinematic shocks rivaling film. It proved video games possessed unique advantages for terror. The player controls the pacing. The player chooses when to walk down that hallway. That agency makes the betrayal of safety more powerful than any movie could achieve. But if the most influential jump scare in gaming history seems impossible to top, wait until you experience the moment that made players uninstall Resident Evil Village and refuse to continue. House Beneviento. House Beneviento's basement sequence in Resident Evil Village isn't just the scariest moment in the game, and after players begged Capcom to tone down RE7's horror, this single section made thousands literally uninstall and refuse to continue. The approach establishes dread before entering. After defeating Lady Dimitrescu, players cross a fog-shrouded bridge overlooking a waterfall. Grisly lynched bodies hang from trees. The manor sits isolated, windows dark. Upon entering and descending an elevator, the game strips away every weapon, item, and piece of equipment. For the first time since RE7's opening, players are completely defenseless. No guns, no healing items, no escape tools, but the psychological horror only escalates from there. The basement unfolds as a nightmare puzzle box. A human-sized mannequin of Mia lies on a table. Players must dismantle it piece by piece, possibly representing Ethan's guilt over her death. Dim lighting illuminates peeling floral wallpaper. After retrieving a key from a well, players descend pitch-black stairs described as the scariest moment in the entire game. Upon returning, the workshop has transformed. The mannequin is gone. The table is covered in blood. Then you hear it. Coos, giggles, something calling the baby appears. An overgrown fetus whose body is an amalgamation of limbs with a massive drooping mouth trailing an umbilical cord. It represents Ethan's subconscious fears about his daughter Rose. Given form by antagonist Donna Beneviento's hallucinogenic powers, capture means instant death. The baby devours Ethan whole. Players can only hide under beds or in closets, listening to its gurgling approach while it searches for them. The creature's design evokes David Lynch's Eraserhead. Its cries eerily sound like a human infant distorted into wrongness. The sequence's music recalled the IT remake for many players. Community consensus is overwhelming. One player wrote that, out of the entire game, this section was by far the scariest and nothing else came close to it. Another admitted they bought the game when it first came out, uninstalled it when they got to House Beneviento because they were that scared, they basically shat themselves every time they opened a door. Producer Koshi Nakanishi acknowledged that some players found it hard to finish Resident Evil 7, leading the team to generally tone down RE Village's horror. Except here. Here they created what many call probably one of the scariest levels ever created for a Resident Evil game. The segment's power comes from total helplessness. No combat skills matter. No weapons exist. No escape except puzzle solving while hunted by something that defies rational understanding. The baby doesn't follow RE's usual bioweapon rules. It's pure nightmare logic made manifest. But these aren't isolated incidents. Every single one of these 12 moments connects to something bigger about why Resident Evil has dominated horror gaming for nearly 3 decades. If you enjoyed this video and want to see Resident Evil's biggest mysteries explained, click the video on screen now